Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. I'm your narrator, Simon. Tonight, we're diving into a place that every single one of us knows too well, somewhere we all visit multiple times a day, the bathroom. On average, most people use it between 4 and 10 times a day, so it's one of the few places we've spent a fair share of our lives in. It's an essential part of our routine, but it can also be one of the most vulnerable. So let me ask you this. Have you ever experienced something strange or even terrifying during one of your visits to the bathroom? Tonight, we'll be covering 2 supernatural bathroom stories that made its rounds in Hong Kong. Some of you may have heard of these before, but I think most of you have not. After both of these stories, I'll share a little bit about what I personally think happened here from a cultural perspective. So if you're interested in that, please stick around till the end. So with that, let's settle in, turn down the lights, and let's jump right into it. So this first story was shared by a young man from Hong Kong. Let's call him Henry. The following incident occurred during Hungry Ghost Month, when, according to tradition, the gates of the underworld are said to open, and the spirits are free to wander among the living. Henry had just graduated from college with an accounting degree. Like many fresh graduates, he dreamed of starting his career at one of the big prestigious accounting firms in the city. But unfortunately, those doors didn't open for him. Still, he was lucky enough to land a position at a small family-owned accounting firm. It wasn't the glamorous start he had imagined for himself, but during a year where so many of his friends were struggling to find jobs at all, Henry felt fortunate just to be able to get his foot in the door. In his mind, this was just the first step. If he worked hard enough, put in the long hours, and proved himself, he could eventually apply again and move up to one of the large international firms. That belief became his driving force. Henry quickly gained a reputation in the office for being a dedicated worker. He was often one of the last people to leave at night, sometimes the very last, long after the rest of the staff had gone home and the building had gone quiet. While most people dreaded staying late in the dimly lit office, Henry saw it as an opportunity to get ahead. What he didn't know was that, during Hungry Ghost Month, being the last one in the building wasn't always a good idea. Henry wasn't a religious man. He didn't believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything remotely supernatural, at least not until tonight. What happened would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew. In the accounting world, there were times during busy season when the workload spiked, and he would find himself working until 2 or sometimes even 3 in the morning. Of course, there's no overtime pay for staying late. This random Tuesday night was one of those nights. The rest of the staff had gone home hours ago, and by now, the entire office was quiet. At around midnight, Henry realized he hadn't eaten a thing since lunch. He had been so buried in his spreadsheets, laser focused on meeting his deadlines, that he hadn't noticed the hours slipping away. Now, his stomach was making it impossible to ignore. With a sigh, he decided to take a short break to head downstairs and grab something quick from one of the nearby 24-hour stalls. He wanted to be back at his desk in 15 minutes. He grabbed his phone, his wallet, and the office keys, unaware that stepping out of that quiet office was going to change the rest of his night. The building had a small unisexed bathroom on each floor, tucked behind the stairwell, only accessible with the key meant for that floor's tenants. Since it was on the way out anyway, he decided he might as well use it before heading downstairs to grab food. As he walked toward the bathroom door, a man in a white dress shirt stepped out. Henry was busy scrolling through a backlog of text messages. He hadn't had time to check while he was working, so he didn't look up directly at this man. Still, as they passed each other, Henry felt an odd chill, a cold breeze that didn't belong in the still, stuffy hallway. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the man turn the corner toward the stairs. He didn't think much of this. After using the restroom, Henry waited by the elevator. That's when the thought struck him. Hold on. Why would anyone else still be here? The bathrooms on each floor could only be accessed by someone with a key to an office on that same floor. And at this hour, there shouldn't have been anyone else around. The other tenants on Henry's floor were small shops. None of them stayed open later than 9 p.m. It struck him as a little odd, but he brushed it off and went downstairs for food. When he returned, his office was the only one with the lights still on. That night, nothing else happened, but the next evening, Henry found himself working overtime again. He had the radio playing softly in the background, keeping him company in the otherwise silent office. Then, without warning, the station cut out, replaced by a sharp wave of static and strange distorted voices. It sounded like a bunch of different radio stations mixing together. Strange, Henry thought, as he turned the radio off, stretched, and glanced at his watch, 1:58 a.m. He decided to take a quick bathroom break before diving back into work. Stepping into the dim corridor, he was met with an unsettling sense of déjà vu. As he reached the bathroom door, a man in a white dress shirt stepped out again. The same man he'd seen the night before. This time, Henry's eyes followed him. The man walked past without a glance, heading toward the stairwell, then slowly ascended the stairs to the next floor, disappearing into the shadows above. Curious, Henry tried the bathroom door without his key. Perhaps the lock is broken, and anybody could just enter. That would explain why people from other floors would be able to use it. But as Henry tried to turn the knob, it was locked. It wasn't broken, so you would need the key to enter. After using the restroom, Henry returned to his desk and decided that he was at a good stopping point for his work. He decided to call it a night and start heading home. He grabbed his laptop, put it in his backpack, and headed over to take the elevator downstairs. At the ground floor, as the elevators opened, he ran into the night guard who was about to step in. He must be heading up for patrol. Henry stepped out first, turned to say goodnight to the guard, and froze. Behind the guard was the man in the white shirt, except now he was semi-transparent. His lower jaw was missing. His whole body looked fractured and mangled, and his eyes stared vacantly as he stepped into the elevator behind the guard. The guard didn't seem to notice the man behind him at all. Instead, he grinned at Henry and joked, "Working half day today? It's only 2 a.m. he said with a chuckle. He tapped the closed door button on the elevator. Henry couldn't bring himself to laugh. His hands were trembling. His voice refused to work. He just stood there, frozen, eyes fixed on this man in the white dress shirt as the elevator doors slid shut. That image, cold, deformed, expressionless, burned itself into Henry's mind. Later, Henry looked into the building's history. That was when he learned that, years before he started working here, someone had jumped to their death from the upper floors of that very building. From that night on, Henry made sure he was out of that office before 11 p.m. He'd rather come in earlier to get his work done. He avoided that bathroom as much as he could, unless it was absolutely necessary. This next story also takes place in a restroom, but this time it's in a cafe. At the time, Nora was 19 years old, a university student who had just started a part-time job at a small neighborhood cafe. She'd only been there a few weeks when her boss approached her with a request. Could she switch to a night shift on the weekends, staying until closing at 11:30 p.m. The night shift paid a bit more, and Nora was saving up for a new MacBook, so she agreed without hesitation. She figured it would be an easy way to pad her savings, just a few late nights each week. She had no idea that one of those nights would leave her with a story she'd never forget. The night in question fell right in the middle of Hungry Ghost Festival in Hong Kong. Before heading home around 8 p.m., the boss stepped outside with a small metal basin, placed it by the curb, and lit a stack of joss paper. The thin smoke curled upward into the humid night air, a traditional offering meant to keep wandering spirits at bay and protect the shop. With that done, he wished Nora and her coworker Adam a good night, then locked up his office and left them to handle the clothes. It started raining shortly after the boss left, putting out the flame outside that was burning the offerings. By 10:30 p.m., business had slowed to a crawl. With no new customers coming in, Nora and Adam decided to get a head start on their closing duties so they could lock up right at 11:30 and head home. Nora took the bathroom, scrubbing and wiping it down, while Adam took the trash outside the front. That's when the door chime rang. A middle-aged woman stepped inside. She wore black pants and a white jacket. Her hair was damp, as if she'd been caught in the rain outside. Her face was pale, and she stood stiffly shivering slightly as if chilled to the bone. Without ordering anything, she asked if they had a bathroom that she could use. Normally, it was for customers only, but Nora hesitated only for a moment. Something about this woman's appearance made her seem so cold and uncomfortable that it felt cruel to refuse her. Nora led her toward the restroom. The woman hurried inside, locked the door behind her, and Nora returned to the dining area to start wiping down the tables and chairs. A few minutes later, Adam came back inside from taking out the trash. When Nora casually mentioned the woman in the bathroom, he looked puzzled. He'd been standing right outside the entire time, but he swore he didn't see anyone come in through the front door. Nora thought Adam was just trying to mess with her and brushed it off. But 10 minutes went by, and the woman still didn't come out. Finally, they decided to check. Nora knocked on the bathroom door. No reply. Reluctantly, she slid the key in the lock and pushed it open. There was no one inside. The only things left behind was a strange, heavy smell and something thick and black in the toilet, like vomit. Her stomach turned. Adam quickly reached over and flushed it away, but before they could process what they'd just seen, the door chime rang again. They both looked toward the front door, but there was no one there. Now, genuinely unnerved, they moved fast, cleaning up, shutting things down, and locking up early. As they were pulling the front gate closed and locking it up, Nora froze. Through the gaps in the metal, she could see her. The same woman. She was standing inside the cafe, right by the bathroom door, staring back at them. That was all it took. Nora and Adam ran without looking back. The very next day, Nora quit. And even now, whenever she passes by that cafe, her eyes can't help but drift to the spot near the back, the place where the bathroom door stands. So, what do you guys think happened here to Henry in the first story and Nora in the second story? Both of these incidents took place during Hungry Ghost Month, and both revolves around bathrooms. Here's my breakdown of each of these stories and what I personally think happened. In Cantonese culture, there are several red flags here in Henry's experience. The incident happened during Hungry Ghost Month, the period in which the gates of the underworld are believed to be opened and the spirits roam freely among the living. Staying alone in a quiet office late at night during this time is considered risky, especially near yin areas like stairwells, elevators, and bathrooms. These are the kind of places where energy is stagnant, making it easier for spirits to linger in. The man in the white dress shirt that Henry kept seeing looked normal when he first came out of the bathroom, but when Henry saw him again going into the elevator, he was missing his lower jaw and had a fractured body. I think this is the spirit's true form, reflecting the way he died. A missing lower jaw is probably linked to a violent trauma or injury, most likely from the impact of jumping out the window. Henry also saw this spirit at almost the exact same time 2 nights in a row. This suggests that this man was a looping spirit, where he's mostly stuck replaying his final moments due to unresolved energy or resentment. Yunhei, I think he might be replaying the final moments in life, possibly taking the elevator up to use the restroom, then taking the stairs up to a higher level floor before ultimately jumping out the window, then going back inside, taking the elevator up, and replaying the whole loop all over again. Also, the guard not seeing the man points to the common belief that some spirits are only visible to certain people at certain times, often when that person's own life energy is lower, especially when they're tired, like Henry was, as he's been working late. As for Nora's story, her boss was in the process of burning offerings to the dead during Hungry Ghost Month before he left to go home. The sudden rain abruptly put out the flame that was burning the offerings. Lighting joss paper before closing is a traditional act of appeasing spirits so they don't follow you. Heavy rain extinguishing this is considered unlucky because it cuts off the offering midway, possibly offending any nearby spirits who see it as being denied or interrupted. So the offerings could be what attracted the spirit in the first place, as she came in hopes of receiving the offerings. So what was the black vomit that Nora found in the toilet? In folk belief, unexplainable stains, foul-smelling substances, or strange bodily fluids left behind suggest a haunting. Spiritual residue left when a ghost has manifested. The black color could be symbolically tied to decay and illness, reinforcing that this was not from a living human. Both Henry and Nora's experience have some overlapping details. In both cases, the encounters happened in or near restrooms. In Cantonese belief, bathrooms have heavy yin energy because they are moist, enclosed, and often windowless. They're also considered unclean places, both physically and spiritually. This makes them prime locations for spirits to appear, especially during Ghost Month. This is the time of year when reports of incidents such as Henry's and Nora's spike. Have you ever experienced anything similar in your own life? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear your own personal experience. Thank you so much, Hong Kong horror fans, for making it all the way to the end of this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories, and I'm looking forward for us to meet again next week. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. I'm your narrator, Simon. So we're officially in Ghost Month now, so I hope you're all staying safe during this time and not staying out too late at night, alone, especially in Asia. Tonight, I'm going to cover some darker stories that don't always end on a positive note, so viewers' discretion is advised. I've covered stories regarding dark magic in other episodes, and many of you agree with me on how dangerous these dark rituals are. But are you familiar with something that's possibly equally as dangerous? It has many different names in different parts of the world. In Cantonese, we call it Deep Sin. Here in the West, we know it more as the Ouija board. They're pretty much different versions of the same thing. This is something you should never participate in if you want to avoid disaster in your own life. There's an old Chinese saying, 请神容易,送神難. The meaning is simple. When you want to set up a shrine and invite a deity into your home, it's very easy. But when you no longer wish to worship this deity anymore, what are you supposed to do? Throw the statue of the deity into the trash? Of course not. Many people who are in this position, out of convenience, sneak out in the middle of the night and abandon the deities at a small temple. These abandoned idols become what people call fallen gods. Though gods are compassionate and forgiving, and they won't punish you, but still, this is deeply wrong. Now, if it's already so difficult to send gods away, then think about this. Inviting spirits is also easy, but sending them away is even harder. Once you've invited a spirit in and think you could just abandon it somewhere, you're in for a nasty surprise. So there are 3 well-known spirit inviting games in China. Deep Sin translates to saucer spirit, Jin Xin translates to coin spirit, and Butt Xin translates to pen spirit. All 3 are methods of spirit inviting rituals, using different items. Many people who play these ended up going through some kind of disaster in their life, or even losing their lives afterwards. That's why, back in the 1960s, the Taiwanese government actually issued an official ban on making or selling anything related to these practices. But the game survived, underground, with students and kids continuing to make their own DIY setups using bowls, coins, and hand-drawn papers as the board. Tonight, I want to share some of these incidents with you. After each story, I'll share a little bit about what I personally think happened from a cultural perspective. Our first story revolves around Deep Sin, the spirit saucer. It's played on a paper board with some Chinese characters written on the paper, numbers on the top, yes and no options written on the bottom. It's pretty much a Chinese version of the Ouija board in the West. Players would then place a small bowl or dish upside down on the piece of paper. And then, all players would put their finger on the dish while asking questions, and the dish will be guided by the spirit to the words or numbers on the board. So this first incident was shared by a man in China. Let's call him Go Sing. It happened during his high school graduation trip. Go Sing and his class took a 3-day, 2-night trip to Taipei, Taiwan. On the first evening, they arrived at the hotel in Taipei. Everyone got to choose roommates. Each room had 2 double beds, so 4 students per room. Go Sing's roommate were Gary, John, and Frank. After dinner, they went back to the room, chatting, watching TV, and taking turns showering. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was their friends from next door. They asked if they wanted to come over to play Deep Scene. Only Gary and John went. Go-Sing stayed behind with Frank, because they honestly didn't think playing such a game was a good idea. It was late, about 12 a.m., so Go-Sing and Frank just hung out in the room, relaxing a bit before getting ready for bed. They had a full day of activities planned the next day, so they wanted to make sure they were well rested. About an hour later, Go-Sing was woken by screaming in the hallway. Frank and Go-Sing both woke up from all the screaming and looked at each other before rushing out of the room. Opening the door, they saw a crowd of other classmates that already came out to see what all the commotion was about, their faces pale with terror. "What happened?" Go-Sing asked. Frank pointed and stammered, "Look, what's happening to John?" Go-Sing turned to the direction he pointed. On the floor, John was convulsing violently, eyes rolled back, foaming at the mouth. "Go get the teacher now," Go-Sing shouted. A few moments later, one of the chaperone teachers arrived. The teacher immediately called for an ambulance. Within 15 minutes, paramedics rushed in and carried John to the hospital. The teacher then questioned a few classmates while everyone else returned to their rooms. Back inside, Go-Sing asked Gary what happened. Still shaken, he explained. John, Gary, and 2 others had started playing Deep Scene. At first, they asked trivial love life questions. Then John asked, "Are you male or female?" The saucer moved slowly toward female. Then he asked, "How did you die?" The saucer then spelled out the R word. I don't think YouTube likes this word, so I'll just refer to it as sexual assault. The others panicked and told him to stop. Go-Sing interrupted. "Don't tell me he asked another question after that." Gary made a face. "Yeah, he did. He had no sense at all. He probably thought he was being funny. He actually asked, did it feel good when it happened?" The moment those words left his mouth, the dish cracked. The lights began flickering violently. Everyone panicked, apologizing over and over. "We're sorry. Please leave. Please return." Then suddenly, pop, the lights went out. When they came back on, John was already collapsed on the floor, seizing. The others fled, and that's when everyone else came out and saw him. Go-Sing and Frank looked at each other in shock. "No wonder something happened," they muttered. John often spoke without thinking, but this time, he'd gone too far. John stayed in the hospital for the day, so he missed out on all of the activities. That night, he was discharged. Doctors found nothing wrong with him, but they kept him there for the day to run a few more tests, just to make sure. Clean bill of health. Just a few bumps and bruises from when he fell over seizing that night. When John rejoined everyone back at the hotel, he seemed like a different person. He was more quiet, which was unlike him. He's normally a troublemaker, always pulling pranks and joking around. His friends were not used to seeing him so solemn and quiet. Last night must have really scared him. When Go-Sing and the others asked him if he was alright, John just shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know, man. I think something's going on with me. Maybe I'm just tired. I didn't sleep well at all at the hospital last night," he said. "What do you mean?" Go-Sing asked. That's when John shared more. "I don't know. I just feel off. I kept having weird nightmares. I'm not sure if maybe I hit my head or something yesterday. I keep dreaming about this girl in her early 20s. I can't even tell if it's a dream or reality anymore. I dreamt myself laying in the hospital bed, trying to fall asleep, but then she walks into the room. At first, she's gorgeous, a 10 out of 10. She stands by the side of my bed, just staring at me, smiling. Then, her face slowly changes, turning more and more horrifying, until she's no longer a gorgeous woman, but something that looks more like a bloated corpse, with hollowed out eyes. She suddenly grabbed me around the neck with her rotting hands and whispered in my ear, "Does this feel good?" before letting out a loud laugh. I would then wake up, and I'm in the same position as I was in the dream. It felt like no dream at all. I don't know what's going on with me, man. It's like I'm losing my grip on reality. Go-Sing didn't know how to respond to this at all. He just tried to comfort him and told him that he had a rough night. The bed at the hospital couldn't have been comfortable, so he probably had nightmares from being so exhausted. They all went to bed early that night, as everyone was exhausted. At around 2 a.m., Gosen woke up to the sound of a loud banging in the dark room. He laid in bed, groggy, listening to what was going on. It was a loud bang followed by what sounded like muttering, but he couldn't make out who was talking or what was being said. Gosen reached over for the bedside lamp and switched the light on, and that's when he saw it. John was standing in the corner of the room, talking to himself. The banging noise was him slamming his head against the wall, full force. There was blood on the wall, and it was running down his face. Even with the lights on now, he continued. Even harder this time, followed by him saying something. Gosen and the others in the room rushed over to see what was going on. Again, the friends pulled John away from the wall. He was bleeding profusely now after hitting his head over and over and over again on the wall. It was as if he was in a daze. Gosen could hear what he was saying over and over now. He kept saying, "Does not feel good. Does not feel good. Does not feel good," under his breath. Gosen sent to get the teacher again, and John was sent right back to the hospital. They didn't see him for the remainder of the trip, as John stayed in the hospital the whole time for observation and further tests to see what was going on with him. When they returned to school, John never came back for the graduation ceremony. They tried to reach out to John after the ceremony, but John's parents always dismissed them, saying that John was sick and would need to be in the hospital for a bit, and it just seemed like they didn't really want to deal with anyone at the moment. Years later, at a reunion, Gosen learned from classmates that John had completely lost his mind since they sent him to the hospital that night. He was sent to an asylum where he would mutter day after day, "Does not feel good. Does not feel good." So, what do you guys think happened here to John? Deep Scene is a deeply taboo game in Asia. It is said one should never touch it unless you want tragedy to come find you. There are many rules to follow and questions that you should never ask if you ever do find yourself in the situation. The most important one is never ask how they died. Do you know why? In Chinese folk belief, spirits linger because of unfinished business or unresolved suffering. Asking how they died reopens the trauma, forcing them to relive their death, which may provoke anger, sorrow, or even resentment. Many of the spirits that linger in this world are victims of violent deaths, from murders to them ending their own lives to violent accidents. These are usually the types of spirits that come when you play this game, and these are the most dangerous kinds of spirits. If angered, it may trigger them to want to possess the player. This is why stories of fainting, hysteria, or sudden sickness are pretty common themes after players ask this question. Also, this game depends on keeping the spirit cooperative until you dismiss it. If you touch on painful or forbidden subjects, the spirit might flip and refuse to leave when told, which is extremely dangerous. It's pretty obvious, but John did so many things wrong in this situation. He asked forbidden questions, such as how the spirit died. This first question alone already crossed a big cultural line. The spirits who respond to Deep Scene aren't benevolent ancestors. They're usually wandering ghosts, known in Cantonese as gu wan ye guai. They're lingering because of violent or unresolved deaths. Asking them to relive this trauma is like ripping open an old wound. It stirs up resentment, which makes them unstable and dangerous. What's worse was John's follow-up question. He was pretty much directly mocking the spirit, basically asking to be possessed. When the dish cracked and the lights flickered when John mocked the spirit, both are classic signs of a spirit's anger. In Chinese ghost stories, when the object used in the ritual breaks, it's not just coincidence. It's a sign that the spirit has fully manifested. Broken saucer means the bridge object that allowed communication has been shattered, and now the ghost isn't contained by the rules of the game anymore. As for John's nightmare at the hospital, I don't think he was having a random nightmare due to sleeping on an uncomfortable bed. The ghost, appearing beautiful at first before rotting away, matches a common belief that spirits may disguise themselves to lure people in before revealing their true form. John's muttering and eventual madness fit the pattern of satsam-feng, spirit-caused insanity, a condition often described in older texts where a person loses their mind after offending a ghost. Also, The players never dismissed the spirit after the game. They panicked. None of them followed the proper ritual to send the spirit back. With Deep Scene, you're supposed to thank the spirit, guide the saucer back to goodbye, and burn the paper afterwards. By letting the saucer break mid-session, apologizing frantically, and then fleeing in fear, they essentially left the door wide open. That explains why the ghost wasn't confined to the session. It followed John back to the hospital, into his dreams, and finally, into his mind. Alright, let's move on to our second story for the night. This story was shared by the mother of a young woman. Let's call her Dee Dee. Instead of Deep Scene, the story is about the other variation, Butt Scene. It's very similar to Deep Scene with the same paper board, but instead of a dish, a pen is used. The players all hold a pen together as it's supposedly guided by the spirit to circle responses on the board. One day, their classmate Sammy brought a large piece of paper to class. It was a homemade Butt Scene board with a bunch of Chinese characters, plus the options for yes and no, male, female, numbers, and letters. He wanted to try it out and play Butt Scene as he's heard that it really works. Though reluctant, Dee Dee and 2 others agreed. They went to an old janitor's closet that was never used after school, lit incense, and began the game. 4 of them held a pen together and started asking random questions. At first, nothing happened, except the pen twitched once, which someone dismissed as nerves. Then, suddenly, a teacher barged in, asking what they were doing in the closet. They stopped abruptly, embarrassed. The session ended. The next day, Sammy insisted on continuing. This time, the paper that they left overnight in the unused closet had new words written on it. I am here. None of them had written it. Uneasy, they proceeded anyway, lighting candles this time. The pen moved on its own, answering trivial questions. One of the friends asked a taboo question. How did you die? The pen was guided to the word car and circled it over and over again. Freaked out, Dee Dee wanted to end the game now. But when they tried to dismiss the spirit, the pen kept circling no again and again. Frightened, one classmate burst into tears and quit. Another tried to calm her. Only Dee Dee and Sammy still held on. The pen scribbled violently, refusing to leave. Finally, Sammy snapped. He threw the pen on the floor, ripped the paper up, and stormed out. As they all left the school, at the school gate, a car sped toward them. In the scramble, everyone jumped back except Sammy, who didn't react in time. He was struck. As Sammy laid on the floor, Dee Dee and the others ran over and knelt beside him, as some bystanders went to call for help. Dee Dee suddenly felt an icy hand grab her own. Looking up, she saw a girl in a school uniform with long hair. Her face was mangled, as if crushed by a vehicle. With her other hand, this girl grabbed Dee Dee's throat and hissed, I've waited a long time for a moment like this. Don't you dare interfere. Dee Dee stared frozen in horror as this girl slowly began to vanish. Sammy survived the impact, but from that day onward, his behavior changed. He scribbled nonsense in his notebooks, laughed manically in class, and even stabbed his own hand with a pen until he fainted. Teachers whispered that he's been possessed. As for Dee Dee and the other 2 friends that participated in this game, not long after, their lives started on a downward spiral as well. The 2 friends both eventually passed away, months apart, from sudden health complications that came out of nowhere. As for Dee Dee, her mental state started to deteriorate as days went by, to the point where she does not even recognize her own mother anymore. She, like John from our last story, ended up in a mental institution where others had to care for her. The story survives only because Dee Dee's mother recounted it. So, what do you think happened here in Dee Dee's story? Is it just coincidence that everyone that participated in this game that day all ended up dead or lost their minds? Can you think of any logical explanation that would have caused this? So, in my opinion, a few things are happening here in this incident. Dee Dee and her friends opened the door, but it was never shut. In all these spirit-inviting rituals, Deep Scene, Butt Scene, Unseen, The golden rule is, if you open the door, you must close it properly. In Didi's case, the first session was interrupted by a teacher. That means they never formally dismissed the spirit. Spirits don't care if you're embarrassed. To them, the ritual was opened and then abandoned. That leaves the door wide open. When they returned the next day, the "I am here" message shows that the spirit had already taken root. That's a classic sign of a stubborn guest, a spirit that refuses to leave because it was not formally sent away. In Chinese but seen lore, when the object, the pen, saucer, or coin, won't cooperate during dismissal, it means the spirit is asserting dominance. It doesn't want to leave. The pen, circling no over and over again, is the spirit rejecting their authority. By tearing the paper up and throwing the pen away, Sammy essentially broke the contract violently. From a cultural lens, that's an insult, and it ensures that the spirit won't just leave quietly. Sudden accidents right after unfinished rituals are very common in these types of stories. The belief is that once the spirit is angered, it looks for ways to claim something, a life, sometimes vitality. Sammy's descent into madness, scribbling nonsense, stabbing himself with a pen, is textbook possession in folk belief. The other two friends who had sudden unexplained deaths reinforced the idea of spiritual debt. When a group breaks ritual, sometimes the spirit doesn't just attach to one person, it divides its curse among them. Didi's own downfall reflects what Chinese elders would call "guai mai sam hu," meaning the ghost has confused the heart and mind. Where John's story is about mocking the spirit's pain, Didi's is about leaving things unfinished. Both are fatal mistakes. Ritual interruption equates to unfinished business. Once begun, the game is a pact. Spirits take that very seriously. An improper dismissal is dangerous. You can't just rip up the paper and storm off. To the spirit, that's like slamming the door in their face. They may stick to you out of anger. In Chinese beliefs, when a spirit feels wronged, it may demand repayment through misfortune, injury, or even life. And that brings us to the end of tonight's episode. I apologize if you found tonight's stories a bit too dark, but I hope you enjoyed them. Once again, thank you so much, Hong Kong horror fans, for listening all the way up until this point of the video. Looking forward to speaking with all of you again next week. Hey everyone, welcome back to Hong Kong Horror. It's summer now, and for some of you, that means it's travel season. Maybe you're headed overseas, exploring temples, beaches, or bustling night markets in Southeast Asia. And of course, what's a trip without a souvenir, right? A little trinket, maybe something that just calls out to you from a dusty corner shop. But what if I told you, not every souvenir is meant to be taken home, especially in some countries. Places where beliefs about spirits and the supernatural run deep. Grabbing the wrong object could bring something else back with you. Tonight's story is about a Hong Kong traveler who made that mistake. A middle-aged Hong Kong Silai, let's call her Ellen. A Silai is a Cantonese slang term. We call middle-aged housewives Silai. They're typically someone who's married, stays at home, and is often stereotyped as being chatty and very involved in local gossip. It's not an insult, it's more like calling someone a busybody auntie. This story was shared by a close friend of Ellen's, someone who was present from the very start of this nightmare, which happened in the late 90s. As usual, after our story, I'll share some cultural background on this, so stick around till the end. Let's dive right in. At the time, Ellen was doing well in life. She was in her mid-50s and owned several properties around Hong Kong. The rental income alone was more than enough to sustain her. She didn't work, and neither did her closest circle of friends. They all made a fortune in the stock market, along with housing prices in Hong Kong. They were all pretty much retired and just looking for other ways to pass the time. They traveled often. A familiar group of Silai, all retired, well off, and always looking for their next getaway. This time, it was Chiang Mai, Thailand. A week-long package tour, booked through a Hong Kong travel company. Everything was arranged, the flights, the hotels, the meals, and all the sightseeing. The first few days were everything they hoped for. They followed the tour bus from temple to market to cafe to waterfall, snapping photos and sampling local foods, laughing like schoolgirls again. On their last full day in Thailand, over breakfast at the hotel buffet, One of the women in the group mentioned something unexpected. She had a distant relative who had been living in Thailand for years now. Through him, she just found out about a local spiritual master, or shaman, who would be performing a rare ritual that evening. The location was just a short drive from their hotel. The woman leaned in, intrigued. It wasn't on the tour itinerary, but it sounded interesting. Something different. A chance to see something spiritual. They joked about asking for more luck in stocks, or a blessing for health or longevity. They weren't exactly superstitious, but they were curious, and it wasn't like they had anything else planned that night. So after dinner, the group of sea lice stepped out of their usual comfort zone. No tour guide, just the 6 of them, following a vague address written on the back of a hotel napkin. They had no idea what kind of ritual they were about to walk into. The building didn't look like much from the outside, just a single-story structure tucked behind a narrow alleyway. But as soon as the women stepped inside, they noticed that this wasn't like any of the temples they visited earlier in the week. No golden Buddhas, no incense wafting through the air. Instead, the room was dim and hushed, lit only by oil lamps placed along the walls. Strange talisman hung from ceiling beams. It felt less like religion, and more like something they'd seen in Thai horror movies. Folk magic, something secretive and old. The sea lice hesitated, but they had come all this way, and there was about 30 locals gathered inside already. Most of them solemn, eyes fixed on the figure in the center of the room, the shaman, seated cross-legged, surrounded by offerings. Out of habit, the group tried to blend in, shuffling along the edges of the space, inching forward for a better view. The ritual lasted nearly an hour, chanting, smoke, sudden bursts of movement. To Ellen and her friends, it felt more like a fascinating performance. At the end, the shaman stood and held up 3 strings of dark, worn prayer beads. He announced that these were blessed items, and he would give them out for free to 3 lucky people in the room. The group of sea lice didn't speak Thai, but one of the local members also spoke Cantonese, so she helped the sea lice translate. Everyone surged forward to try to get one of these beads. Ellen didn't even know what these beads were for, but they were free and they were limited. Her hands shot up before she even thought about it, so did everyone else's. Somehow, hers was one of the hands he chose. Ellen was too thrilled. She laughed as she turned to her friends, holding it up proudly. None of them got one, just her. She felt lucky. In Cantonese, we have a saying, "Mo tam siu pi ni." Don't be greedy for small benefits. It's a phrase older folks say when something seems too good to be true, a quiet warning that free things often come with a hidden cost. I think this phrase fits perfectly to Ellen's situation here. Before dismissing the crowd, the shaman gave the 3 recipients a final set of instructions. They were to wear the beads every night, only at night, and before sleeping. They have to recite a short mantra in Thai. He repeated it very slowly, syllable by syllable, until they could memorize the rhythm. It was said to invite fortune, wealth, and prosperity, but only if done consistently, and only if done with faith. Ellen didn't understand a word of it, but the mantra was short, and the rhythm stuck in her head like a tune. She repeated them under her breath until she memorized it. Back at the hotel, her friends teased her, half joking, half envious. "You're the lucky one. If it really brings you wealth, you better treat us all to dinner." Ellen laughed, clutching the beads like a prize. She felt special. The next morning, they boarded their flight back home to Hong Kong. The trip had come to an end, but Ellen didn't forget the beads. She followed the instructions precisely, each night before bed. She stood in the bathroom mirror, slipped the beads over her neck, and chanted the mantra softly under her breath, over and over again. At first, nothing changed. 2 weeks passed, no sudden windfall, no winning stocks. But then, Ellen began to hear a voice. It started faint, just a whisper behind her right ear, a mumble that wasn't Cantonese. She couldn't place it. She brushed it off, thinking maybe she had too many late nights playing mahjong. Her friends joked that she was just too obsessed with the ritual, but Ellen stayed consistent. She kept the routine, and the voice grew louder. Still foreign, but somehow, I felt like her body understood. One night, as she chanted before the mirror, Ellen's hands began to move on their own. Her fingers curled, twisted, made the shapes of strange symbols in the air like seals from an old folklore. She didn't recognize them. Her body simply acted. It unsettled her. She finally decided to stop. No more beads, no more chanting, just in case. But it didn't help. The voice didn't go away. The hand movements continued, especially between 3 and 4 a.m., when Ellen would suddenly wake, drenched in sweat, and find herself seated upright in bed, fingers moving in the dark like someone else was puppeteering her limbs. Friends told her that she looked tired. Then they said she looked sick. Her skin grew dull, the lines on her face deepened. She looked like she aged 2 years in just a few weeks. But still, she didn't know what the voice was saying. But every night, it was clearer. And the voice kept coming. Eventually, Ellen started experiencing insomnia. When she did manage to drift off, it was never restful. She had the same recurring nightmare every single night, always between 3 and 4 a.m. without fail. She found herself standing inside an old wooden hut, somewhere humid and dim, somewhere that felt like Southeast Asia. But it wasn't her. She wasn't in her own body. She was someone else entirely, a man, maybe in his 40s, his arms lean and sun-darkened. She could feel his muscles tense as he shouted, could feel his pulse racing. There was a woman across from him, young, crying, yelling back. The air was thick with anger. It was the middle of a violent argument. Ellen didn't understand the words, but the rage was unmistakable, blinding. Then the dream would shift. The man would now be standing on top of a tall building, a rooftop somewhere high up. And before Ellen could do anything, before she could even move, he would run, straight off the edge. That's when she would always wake up, heart pounding, sweat soaked. The same dream happening over and over again. Each time she remembered more detail. The sound of the woman's voice, the feel of the dirt floor in the hut, the wind on the rooftop. It wasn't just a dream, it felt like a memory. But it wasn't hers. Ellen didn't want to believe it at first, but after everything that had happened, the voices, the hand signs, the nightmares, there was only one conclusion that made sense. It had to be the beads. She pulled them from her drawer and dropped them straight into the trash can. But the voices didn't stop. If anything, they became more aggressive. Sometimes she heard it even during the daytime, like someone was standing behind her shoulder. She went to doctor after doctor, specialist, neurologist, scans, blood work. Everything came back clean, no explanation for what she was experiencing. That's when she remembered the tour guide from their trip. He had taken care of everything during the trip. Maybe he could help again. Ellen called him. She didn't hold anything back and told him everything. The man listened quietly. When she finished, there was a long pause before he spoke. He's heard of this before, not often, but enough to know it wasn't just folklore. Some shamans in Thailand, not all, but a certain few, were known to place intentional curses on unsuspecting tourists. They would hand out free gifts, or blessings, often during mysterious ceremonies, and those items would serve as anchors, conduits for something else. And after a while, when the victim became desperate enough, the only solution was to go back to the shaman who started it. Of course, the removal of the curse wasn't free. It was some kind of spiritual extortion, and for someone like Ellen, there wouldn't be another way out. The guide agreed to help her. He would arrange transport, go with her even. He helped Ellen book her ticket for the same week. But something didn't want her to leave. On the day of her flight, Ellen arrived early to the airport. She looked exhausted, distant, but determined. Then, as she stood in line at the security checkpoint, the voice returned, sharp and insistent, like it was right next to her ear. She tried to ignore it, tried to keep moving, and then everything went black. She collapsed in the middle of the terminal. An ambulance came. By the time she regained consciousness, she was in the hospital. Doctors ran more tests. Again, nothing conclusive. No stroke, no seizure, no nothing. Still, they asked her to stay overnight for observation, just to be safe. That night, Ellen was placed in a private room on the 9th floor. No one knew exactly what happened in the late hours in the night. The nurse on duty said the call bell was never pressed, but at 3:47 a.m., Ellen jumped out the window. Afterwards, the tour guide, who was supposed to meet her, began warning his clients to never attend rituals they didn't understand, and to never bring back something just because it was free. So, what do you think happened to Ellen here? There's a lot going on, but here's what I think happened. Ellen was linked to a soul through the beads. These prayer beads weren't a blessing, but rather a binding object, designed to connect the person wearing them with a restless or vengeful spirit, most likely the man from her recurring nightmares. In some Southeast Asian occult practices, Cursed objects are intentionally used as a vessel to offload a haunting, or pass a spirit onto someone else, often through ritual or contact. Once accepted, the bond is sealed. The time that Ellen keeps waking up every night between 3 to 4 a.m. is known as the spirit hour. This is known in many Asian spiritual systems as the time when ghosts are strongest and boundaries between the worlds are weakest. This explains why the spirit's influence intensifies at night, controlling Ellen's body, entering her dreams, and eventually possessing her completely. The recurring nightmare was a spiritual replay, or loop, but it's not her own. Ellen wasn't dreaming, she was being shown the final moments of the man's life, someone who passed violently. Ellen, seeing herself in his body in this dream, shows a type of identity overriding, a sign that the spirit was merging with her, preparing to replace her soul entirely. Finally, the fall from the 9th floor wasn't Ellen ending her own life. I think this was a complete spiritual takeover. By the time Ellen tried to go back to Thailand to remove the curse, it was a little too late. The bond was too deep, and the spirit refused to let her leave, because that would mean breaking the link between them. In many Thai and regional beliefs, people who died by ending their own life carry extremely heavy spiritual energy, especially if it's tied to emotional distress. These spirits can become very powerful ghosts. Dark practitioners, especially in Thai occultism, may collect or bind these troubled spirits to objects like bones, beads, or clothes, through rituals performed on site of death, or using personal remnants. In some cases, they even go to places where tragic deaths have happened and call out to the spirits, offering them vessels to attach to, promising freedom or purpose in exchange for being useful. Another possibility is that the man that Ellen kept seeing in her dream was once a victim of the same shaman, someone who attended a ritual just like Ellen did and fell into the same trap, ultimately dying just like in Ellen's dream. His soul, unable to reincarnate, may have been intentionally trapped in the prayer beads. We'll never know, but it's possible that Ellen became the next wandering spirit, another spirit to be used by the shaman for profit. The free beads were the bait, and by accepting them, wearing them, and chanting the mantra, Ellen unknowingly opened herself as a vessel. So if you guys are ever going to Southeast Asia, just remember, not everything you see is safe to be brought home. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode. Until we meet again next week. Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of Hong Kong Horror. Tonight, we're heading back to Japan. Now, I'll be honest with you, one of my favorite things about Japan has to be their convenience stores. Everything is so delicious and open 24 hours. I could live off those convenient egg salad sandwiches. But what if I told you? Sometimes, the people working the night shifts in those very stores experience things they can't explain. Tonight's story is one of those cases. It's one that stayed with me. After the story, I'll share what I personally think happened here from a cultural perspective, so stick around if you're interested. Let's dive right in. This story comes from an older man living in rural Japan. Let's call him Takashi. Takashi was 70 years old at the time and newly retired from a long career in the city as a salaryman. But sitting around all day didn't suit him. He's heard of retirees falling into depression after losing their routine, their purpose. So to keep himself busy, both mentally and physically, he picked up a part-time job at a convenience store. It was the 24-hour branch, tucked inside a gas station, way out in the countryside. Not the kind of place you'd expect anything unusual to happen. Takashi took the night shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. He liked the slow pace. Most of his customers were long-haul truck drivers stopping in for snacks or a quick refill for gas. For a while, it was peaceful. There was a family that frequented the store, a man, his wife, and their young daughter. Locals, judging from how often they came around. The mother and daughter usually dropped by around 7 p.m. to grab a few things after school. Usually it was the same snacks or a few drinks to bring home. The father came in later, usually around midnight. Sometimes just to top up on gas, sometimes just for a pack of cigarettes. And every Sunday, without fail, the whole family came together, laughing, chatting, buying drinks and snacks before heading home. Takashi never knew their names, but he recognized their faces since they came by so often. Then, one Sunday evening, the mother and daughter didn't show up. Takashi figured maybe they were busy or just home sleeping. Pretty normal, since it was around 4 a.m. The father came in alone, but something about him tonight was off. He came in a lot later than usual. He also looked pale, worn out. His eyes were dull, and his hands trembled slightly as he approached the counter. "Are you okay, sir?" Takashi asked. The man gave a twitchy smile. "Yeah, just tired from work." He pointed to his usual brand of cigarettes behind the counter. Takashi grabbed them, rang him up, and that's when the man patted his pockets down, looking embarrassed. "Oh, I forgot my wallet at home," he said. "Mind if I pay you back in a couple of days?" Now, Takashi had seen him enough times to trust him. They exchanged small talk plenty of times before, so Takashi waved it off, paid for the pack himself, and handed them over to the man. The man nodded, thanked him softly, and walked out into the dark. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same man, same request, same empty expression. "I forgot my wallet," he said. "Can I pay you back in a couple of days?" This time, Takashi noticed something else. His movements, his voice, everything about him was eerily identical to the night before. Still, Takashi nodded and handed the man the cigarettes, same as the night before. "I haven't seen your wife and daughter lately. How are they doing?" he asked gently. The man paused. "They're fine," he said. "I'm heading home to see them now." Then, once again, he dropped his gaze and walked away from the counter and out into the darkness. This time, something in Takashi told him to follow, just to see where this man went. But by the time he stepped outside, the man was already gone. No car pulling out, no taillights, no engine noise, just silence. On the third night, the mother and daughter finally came back. Takashi felt a wave of relief when he saw them walk through the glass doors. "Hey," he said, "I haven't seen you two for a few days. Is everything okay?" The mother gave a faint smile, but her eyes were puffy. The little girl kept her gaze on the floor. They grabbed their usual favorite snacks, paid quickly, and turned to leave. Takashi gently stopped them. "I'm so sorry to ask, ma'am, but your husband came by the last 2 nights. He said he forgot his wallet, so I covered him for 2 packs of cigarettes. Do you mind settling up for him?" The mother froze. Her eyes widened. She slowly turned to face Takashi, and her expression changed completely. She looked horrified. Then she said something that made Takashi's blood run cold. "My husband passed away 2 nights ago." She shared that he had been on his way to work when he realized he'd forgotten his wallet at home. He turned the car around, but on the way back, he was struck by a truck, killed instantly. They hadn't been to the store because they were busy making funeral arrangements. Takashi felt the room spin. He had spoken to that man twice, had casual conversations, handed him cigarettes. The mother, still shaken, insisted on paying Takashi back, but he gently refused. "Don't worry about it," he told her. "It's on me." He felt horrible about the whole situation after hearing what happened. She nodded, thanked him, bowed slightly, and then left with her daughter. Takashi stood there in a daze. Later that night, when the store was quiet again, Takashi checked the CCTV footage for the past 2 nights. The camera above the register, the one that recorded his interactions with customers, was working fine all night, until the exact moment the man supposedly came in. During those few minutes, the footage glitched, just static. He could somewhat see himself moving behind the counter through all the static, taking down the pack of cigarettes, talking to someone, reaching out to someone. But on the other side of the counter was a blur of heavy static and white noise. He checked the front door camera next. At exactly 4 a.m. both nights, the automatic glass doors opened, and about 5 minutes later, they opened again, like someone had entered and then left. But there was no one there. No figure, no shadow, just empty space. The following night, the mother came by again with her daughter. They bought a few things and left some extra change on the counter, more than the amount owed. Takashi ran outside to give back the extra. He caught up just as they were getting into their car. That's when he saw it. In the back seat sat a man. He was faint, translucent, wearing the exact same clothes the father always wore. He was staring straight ahead, expressionless, still. Takashi froze. The mother drove away, unaware of what was sitting behind her. So, what do you guys think happened here? Was Takashi just exhausted from his long shift? Was his mind playing tricks on him? Or did the father of the family come back just to be with his family again? Maybe some routines don't break, not even in death. Let me know what you think happened in the comments below. Here's what I think happened here. Sudden or accidental deaths, especially when it happens during routine daily life, is considered a classic setup for a ghost who doesn't know they're dead. This is often referred to as seimanbai, translating to dying with your eyes open, meaning that the soul can't rest due to unresolved matters. The father in the story died unexpectedly and suddenly, on his way home to retrieve his wallet. That unfinished task combined with his regular routine likely trapped his spirit in a loop, repeating what he intended to do before death. It's not uncommon for a spirit to return to familiar places, especially those connected with their final memories in life. These spirits can exist in a liminal state, somewhere between awareness and denial. At first, the ghost often doesn't realize they're dead, which is what I think happened with his father when he came into the store the first 2 nights. But when Takashi saw him in the back of the car, I believe that's when the shift happened. The ghost, by now, most likely has become aware of his death and is choosing to linger just a little longer to be with his family. So the first 2 nights, he was most likely unconscious to his own death, only acting out of habit and unfinished obligation. Perhaps he was with his wife when she shared the news of his passing to Takashi. After hearing this, the spirit may have gained clarity that he's dead. There's an old Chinese saying, 人有情，鬼亦有意, which roughly translates to, people have emotions and so do ghosts. The sighting of him in the back of the car could have been a turning point for him, realizing his own death. He may not have fully crossed over or faded away immediately, but in that moment, he was no longer a lost soul, but just holding on to the last threads of love from his old life before letting go. He chose to have one last ride with his family, not to haunt, but to just accompany them one last time. Alright, for our second incident for tonight, we're going back to Hong Kong. In a concrete jungle like Hong Kong, space always comes at a cost. For some working class residents, there's only one affordable option left: subdivided flats. The infamous Tongfang. One-family apartments divided up into cramped cubicles with shared kitchens, thin walls, and barely any privacy. Some of these were legal on paper, but barely livable in practice. In this story, our friend Derek ended up in one of these Tongfangs and experienced something truly terrifying. He was 32 years old at the time, working night shifts at a warehouse near Samsoibo. His pay wasn't bad, but the late hours and long commute from his family home in North Point, Bangkok, was slowly taking a toll on him. After missing too many last buses and sleeping at his workplace more than once, he decided to find a place closer to work. He decided to look into subdivided flats, only 2,500 HKD a month, no windows, but it was just a 10-minute walk from the warehouse. He decided for that price, it was a no-brainer. The unit was part of a 4-story walk-up, chopped into 6 coffin-sized rooms. Derek's was at the end of a narrow hallway, the furthest in. The walls were thin plywood. The ceiling was low. The room had a single flickering fluorescent bulb that gave off a cold, almost surgical glow. Derek hated the lighting, so he bought a cheap floor lamp from IKEA when he moved in. The bed came with the room. Though it wasn't the prettiest, it was stained and the springs were exposed. He laid down his own sheets, trying not to think about how many strangers had slept in it before. There was also a mirror in the room, a cheap one, stuck on the wall next to the bed. So Derek would pretty much see himself in the reflection as he laid in bed. That's how small the room was. By the first week, something already felt off. One early morning, after finishing a shift around 4:30 a.m., Derek returned home completely exhausted. He collapsed into bed without even changing his clothes and passed out. But within minutes, he was wide awake again. It wasn't a sound that startled him. It felt like a presence. The unmistakable feeling that someone was standing right next to his bed. He felt the breeze of someone's breath on him, the feeling of someone watching him. He fumbled around for the lamp switch and switched it on. The light buzzed to life, but there was no one there. But the air, it reeked, thick and stale like the smell of rotting fish. It smelled so strong, as if he was standing in the middle of a wet market with the fish stalls. Derek didn't bring any fish home recently, and neither did his direct neighbors, or so they claimed the next day when he asked. Still, the smell returned on and off at odd hours, always when he was half asleep. One afternoon, after his usual shift, he showered and fell asleep in the room. His door was shut and the lamp was off. Since he had no windows and no natural light, it was hard to tell what time it was without a clock. Morning and night became meaningless. That day, something changed. A pain bloomed in his abdomen, sharp and unnatural, as if something heavy were crushing him. Derek woke up from this and tried to move, but he couldn't. His body was locked, paralyzed. Panic rose fast. His eyes fluttered open, but the room was pitch black. He reached for his phone beside the pillow. With immense effort, he managed to brush the screen. The glow lit up part of the room, just enough for him to see. That's when he saw it. In the mirror, he saw a figure just above him. It was a woman with long black hair hanging down in long tangled strands, feet planted squarely on his stomach. Not standing beside him, standing on him. Derek couldn't see her on top of him, but only when he looked in the mirror. The woman slowly turned her head toward the mirror until her full face was visible in the reflection of the mirror. She had an unnatural smile, locking eyes with Derek through the reflection. Derek tried to scream, but nothing came out. His mouth was open, his lungs full of fear, but he was voiceless. He forced his body to move, fighting what felt like an invisible weight pressing down on him. After what felt like an eternity, he managed to get some movement back in his hand. He slammed the switch on the lamp as the light from the bulb lit up the whole room. Instantly, the figure was gone. As soon as the light went on, Derek regained movement again. He laid there, drenched in cold sweat, staring at the mirror. Had he imagined it? A dream? A hallucination? 被鬼压, that's what we call it. That's what we call sleep paralysis when ghosts are involved. Derek told no one, but on his next day off, he begged his girlfriend to spend the night with him at his place. He gave no reason, fearing she wouldn't believe him. He just said he hated being alone in the new flat. She agreed, but barely lasted the night. The room was too cramped, too stuffy. Two full-grown adults should not sleep on a twin-sized bed. It was so uncomfortable all night, as she felt like she would fall off the bed at any moment. She never came back after that, but nothing supernatural happened that night. Then came the worst night. Derek got home mid-morning, just after 7 a.m. Most of the building was quiet. The other tenants have already headed out to work. He left his door slightly open so that a sliver of hallway light could reach into the darkness. Since he had no windows, he did this occasionally so that some fresh air could make its way into his stuffy room. He lay down, exhausted. He fell asleep within minutes, but something was different this time. There was no weight. Instead, he felt too light. His body felt like it was rising. He couldn't open his eyes, couldn't speak, but he felt his body lifting off the bed, a slow, eerie ascent, inch by inch, as if something had reached inside and was pulling his soul out by the seams. He didn't feel like he was dreaming, as if he knew what was going on. He was floating, but it was as if he was outside his physical body, as if he was floating upward. He was able to see his physical body still asleep beneath him. That's when he saw her again, standing just outside the cracked door. The same woman he saw a few nights ago was now standing at his door, smiling at him as he was floating higher and higher, just watching. Terrified, Derek began to recite the only Buddhist prayer he could remember, one his grandmother used to chant under her breath when she burned incense. Namo Amito Phat, Namo Amito Phat. Again and again, in his mind, desperate. And slowly, he began to come down. He felt the weight return, the pressure of the mattress beneath his back, the feeling of gravity reclaiming him. He gasped and pulled it upright. The room was empty, the door still cracked open, but a little wider now, as if someone had opened it while he was asleep. Derek didn't wait. He called the landlord and gave his notice on the spot, packed what little he had, and left the room the same afternoon. But to this day, he refuses to sleep in any room with a mirror near the bed. So, what do you guys think happened to Derek in this Tongfang? Was he working so much at night that he was at a point of exhaustion where his mind started playing tricks on him? Or did he really encounter something from the other side? From a cultural perspective, there are a few things going on here. Based on traditional Chinese and Southeast Asian spiritual beliefs, some of the events in the story suggest a haunting rooted in residual trauma, possibly involving a restless spirit, 孤魂野鬼. The spirit could be someone who's passed in the building, or in the vicinity of where Derek was staying. In many Chinese beliefs, if someone dies alone or without a proper funeral or spiritual rites, their spirit becomes a wandering ghost, especially if they died in pain, depression, or isolation. The mirror's reflection, the smell of fish, and the pressure on the body are classic signs of lingering yin energy, yumhei. The ghost standing on Derek's stomach suggests dominance or an attempt to suppress or control him. If the spirit was someone who ended their own life, there's a possibility that they may not even know they're dead. It's possible that she could have stayed in this room before Derek and is now angry that he is occupying her space. What Derek experienced matches the traditional belief of 被鬼抓, when a ghost presses or immobilizes someone during sleep. Symptoms of this include the inability to move or speak, the feeling of someone near or on the body, and sometimes even seeing an apparition mid-paralysis. This isn't just medical sleep paralysis in folk belief. It's often seen as a warning or spiritual attack, especially if it happens multiple times in the same place. Also, in both Chinese and Southeast Asian belief systems, mirrors can reflect more than just the physical world. They are believed to be portals to the spirit world, especially in the high-yin place like windowless rooms, hospitals, or subdivided flats, just to name a few. If someone dies in front of a mirror, it can trap their spirit there. That's why mirrors are often covered during funerals, so the soul doesn't get accidentally trapped or lost. As for Derek's floating experience, this could be related to his soul being pulled. The sensation of his soul rising suggests a near-possessive encounter. I don't believe Derek's body was really floating in a physical sense, but to him, it felt that way, because the soul is floating out of his body, spiritually. This is known as soul departure. It's called Lei Wen in Cantonese. In Taoist and Chinese folk belief, the human being is made up of Samwan Tapak, 3 spiritual souls, and 7 physical spirits. The One governs consciousness, identity, and spiritual memory. Under trauma or spiritual assault, one or more of these spiritual souls can be forced out of the body. When the soul drifts away without control, it leaves the body vacant, vulnerable to possession, also called Seongsan in Cantonese. A ghost or other spirit may move in, especially in places with really strong yin energy, like Derek's room, which is dark, damp, and windowless. Number 2 is death. If the soul cannot return, the person may fall into a coma or die. And 3 is spiritual substitution, Taisun. We covered this topic in detail in one of my previous episodes. In more sinister folklore, a ghost who died unjustly may pull someone's soul out to take their place in the cycle of reincarnation, creating a ghostly swap. That is, the living dies, the ghost returns in their body. The fact that Derek didn't just feel crushed, as with typical ghost oppression, but instead he felt himself floating upward, indicates that something was trying to pull his soul away, not to kill him violently, but to take his place quietly. So why would the spirit want to do this? Some believe that when a ghost is lonely, resentful, or lacking a path to reincarnation, it may try to possess a living person's body, especially if this person is vulnerable. When they are emotionally weak, physically weak, or spiritually unprotected. In Cantonese, we call this Seongsan. The spirit may want to do it for a number of different reasons. To experience the living world again, to fulfill unfinished desires, because sometimes they don't realize they're dead and believe the body is theirs, or more tragically, because they died without proper rites. Another reason that Derek was experiencing these things is because the room has become a Yumhei hotspot, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead is thin. Without spiritual protection, the soul can be pulled away during sleep, especially in isolated, unblessed places. Add in a mirror, no sunlight, and frequent sleep, and it becomes a perfect environment for a spirit to linger. I personally think that the ghost wasn't just haunting Derek, it was testing whether it could push the soul out. The first time, it stood on him. The second time, it tried to displace him. Had he not resisted, he might have woken up days later as someone else, or not woken up at all. Thanks for listening all the way up to here. I hope you enjoyed the story and the cultural lesson for this week. Until we meet again next week. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. I'm your narrator, Simon. Tonight's episode is another pretty heavy one, related to a deep concept in Cantonese culture called 錢世冤孽. If you wronged someone badly in the past life, cheated them, betrayed them, or caused their death, that debt can carry over into the next life. Are any of you familiar with this concept? If not, hopefully you will be more knowledgeable about this after this episode. Alright, so do any of you drive in a major city? Parking is always a nightmare if you don't have a parking spot. But what if I told you, sometimes having a parking spot, especially in one of those old underground parking garages, can lead to a different type of nightmare. If you've had to walk through one of these parking garages alone at night, then you probably know how unsettling it could be. This first story is from a man from Seongsui. It happened over 10 years ago in the parking garage of a private housing estate, but it's something he will never forget for the rest of his life. Let's call him Tony. Tony, at the time, worked as an IT manager. Some nights, he would have to work overtime, sometimes clocking out around 11:30 p.m., reaching his home parking lot after midnight. The parking garage he parked in was old and poorly maintained. The lighting was dim, the air smelled damp and faintly rancid, and he was fairly certain people occasionally relieved themselves in the stairwells. It smelled horrible, but what can he do? Tony had a spot that he preferred parking in every night. It was a corner space on the 3rd floor. It was out of the way and far enough where nobody would bother his car or ding it by accident. That night, he parked as usual, switched off the engine, and just stepped out when a soft female voice called out right next to his ear. Sam. Sam. Tony froze. He wasn't Sam. His name was Tony, so who was around this late at night calling him Sam? He glanced around but saw no one. Dismissing it as fatigue from a long day of work, he shook his head and rubbed his ears. The voice was gone. As he was walking to the elevator to exit the parking garage, his phone rang, making him jump. It was just a few friends seeing if he wanted to go out for siuye, a late-night meal. Since he had the next day off, he agreed. He turned around and hopped back in his car, planning to drive to meet up with his friends. That's when he noticed a sudden chill swept over him. The inside of the car felt like a refrigerator. He started the car up and began driving slowly. As he rounded a corner, his peripheral vision caught something. At the very spot where he was just parked, a woman in a long red dress was standing in the shadows by one of the cement pillars, watching him as he drove away. He didn't slow down to get a better look, but he just kept looking back at her in the rearview mirror. He didn't see anyone standing there before. Where did she come from? What was she doing there? Why was she watching him like that? Tony met up with his friends, and as they were all sharing a meal together, he told them what he saw in the parking lot. Most of them dismissed it and joked about it, saying, "Whoa, you have a secret admirer, Tony. Tell me, was she hot?" But one friend grew serious and told him not to park there again. Tony didn't ask why, but he thought that it wouldn't hurt to listen and took the advice. The next night, after coming home from playing badminton with the same group of friends, the first 2 floors of the parking lot were all taken, forcing him back to the 3rd floor. The lot was nearly packed tonight, and the only available space was the spot right next to his usual one, by the concrete pillar. He said he wouldn't park here again, but he had no other choice. Every other spot was taken. And also, it wasn't the exact same spot, just really close to it. He began reversing into it. After backing in and parking the car nice and straight inside the designated spot, he stepped out of the car. His heart sank. Somehow, he ended up right in the exact spot he had always parked in. Tony just stood there, confused. How in the world is this possible? He is 100% sure he was parking in a different spot, next to his usual spot, as he was backing into it. But now that he's outside, he's back in the usual spot. He decided that something wasn't right. He got back in his car again, deciding that he was just going to try to find a different spot. When he switched on his headlights, there she was again. The same woman he saw yesterday, in the red dress. Long hair hiding her face, her form faintly transparent. She stood directly in front of the windshield and spoke, but her voice sounded as if she was whispering right into his ear, even though she was outside the car. "Sam, you don't remember me?" Panicked, Tony stammered in his head that she had the wrong person. "So now you don't know me? I died because of you, and now you don't even know who I am? I want you to come with me." His throat tightened, literally. He felt invisible hands squeezing his neck, breath draining from his lungs. Then, suddenly, another voice, male and calm, broke through. "Miss Chu, debts from a past life should be settled in the past. Let it go." The pressure around Tony's neck slowly eased up and vanished. When Tony looked up again, she was gone. A man stood outside his car in a security guard outfit. Tony assumed he was the security guard for this parking lot. He calmly leaned in closer to Tony, who now rolled down the window. "Are you okay, sir?" he asked. Tony sat there, still dazed, catching his breath still. As he slowly nodded to the guard admitted he'd seen the woman too, and that Tony was actually the reincarnation of the man who caused her death decades ago. "This time, you were lucky I was here doing patrol," the man warned. "Next time, maybe not." How did the security guard know all this? Tony had no idea. Perhaps this guard had some kind of gift. Did he change his career from something in the spiritual field? Shaken, Tony later hired a Taoist priest to perform a ritual for this woman, whose surname he was told was Chu, the same name that the security guard called her by. After this ritual, days later, as Tony was driving along a busy road, dizziness overcame him. The red-dressed woman appeared again on the side of the road, and in that split second, his car drifted into the path of an oncoming truck. Tony swerved out of the way last minute, managing to avoid the oncoming truck, but he crashed into the side of the road into some bushes. The airbag saved him. He escaped with minor injuries, but the message was clear. This was not over. Tony got in contact and brought in a high-ranking Taoist master to perform a full transcendence ritual in the parking lot, hoping that it would help. Chanting echoed through the garage as monks prayed for Miss Chu to release her grudges from the past life and move toward reincarnation. When it was over, the suffocating weight in Tony's chest lifted. His car was totaled in the accident, so he decided to just start taking public transportation instead, and never replaced it. He never set foot in that parking garage again. As for the mysterious guard who appeared that night to rescue Tony, he never saw him again. He even asked the guard at the entrance of the parking lot, but nobody knew who he was. Whether he was a spirit protector or a friend from a past life, Tony would never know. So, what do you guys think happened to Tony in this parking garage? Was he just tired and seeing and hearing things that weren't actually there? Or was there something more sinister at play here? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Alright, so here's what I think happened in Tony's situation. I believe the spirit, known as Miss Chu, was someone that Tony wronged in his past life. This is something called Jincai Yunyip in many traditional Chinese and Cantonese folk religion. It's believed that a person's soul is reborn many times. If you wronged someone badly in a past life, cheated them, betrayed them, or caused their death, that debt can carry over into the next life. This is called Yunyip, literally resentment karma. The wronged soul becomes a vengeful spirit if they die with strong emotions and fail to reincarnate. Instead of moving on, they wait, sometimes for generations, to find your soul again in its new body. When they do, they may haunt or harass you until you acknowledge them. They can cause misfortune or illness to pay back the pain you caused. They can also directly attempt to take your life. From what the mysterious guard told Tony, Miss Chu died because of him, or rather, because of the man he was in his past life. She called him Sam, so I assume that was his name from his last life. She might have been romantically involved with him, and he betrayed her, leading to her ending her own life. Why do I think this? Because she was seen wearing red clothing, and in Cantonese folklore, female spirits dressed in red are almost always vengeful spirits. It's believed that if a woman wears red when they end their life, they are believed to become really powerful ghosts, because red locks their resentment to the mortal realm. Spirits in red are considered more dangerous because they have the willpower and energy to actively seek revenge. Maybe Miss Chu might have been promised a marriage, but he abandoned her, ruining her social standing in the time when that could destroy a woman's life. She might have died protecting him or taking the blame for something he did. We won't know for sure, but I strongly believe it is related to one of these. In all of these cases, the emotional intensity, betrayal, humiliation, or unfulfilled love is believed to anchor the spirit in the mortal realm. So why did Miss Chu refer to Tony as Sam? It's believed in Cantonese culture that the soul has a continuous thread across lifetimes. She doesn't see Tony, she sees the same soul from her lifetime. So she called him by the name he had used in their shared past life, Sam. The human body changes every lifetime, but the Ling One, spirit soul, carries an energetic imprint that remains consistent across reincarnations. A ghost tied to someone through karmic debt doesn't see the current you. They sense the soul's signature, and that's what triggers recognition. So to Miss Chu, Tony wasn't Tony, he was still Sam, the man from her own lifetime, regardless of his current body and name. Humans almost never remember their past lives consciously, but spirits can remember everything. That's why Tony was so confused. He had no memory of ever being Sam or knowing Miss Chu. So another question. Who was this mysterious security guard that saved Tony? If he was a real security guard, then he should have been easy to track down, but Tony couldn't find him again. This leads me to believe that he wasn't an ordinary human. In folk interpretation, this sudden vanishing means this helper came from elsewhere, intervened for a single purpose, and left when the job was done. He may have been a wandering benevolent spirit. Not all ghosts are malicious. Some are known to act as protectors. These are often spirits of people who in life had strong protective instincts. Such spirits may still patrol familiar places and step in to prevent the death that isn't fated to happen. This is one possibility. Another possibility is that he is a karmic acquaintance from a past life. The man's knowledge of Tony's connection to Miss Chu and his use of specific language about past life debts could mean he wasn't tied to the parking lot at all. He could be a spirit ally from Tony's own soul history, someone who owed Tony a favor in a previous life and repaid it by saving him here in this life. Cantonese belief allows for cross-life relationships where karmic allies and enemies meet again over multiple reincarnations. Alright, now, let us move on to our second story, which also takes place in a parking garage in Hong Kong, similar to the one that Tony parked in. Let's call this next man Sunny. Sunny worked in finance. Long hours and late nights were normal for him, so staying behind after everyone else had gone home never felt strange. On this particular night though, something was different. This incident happened during Ghost Festival. The streets outside were alive with flickers of orange light and the smell of smoke as people burned offerings for the dead along the curb. Ash drifted, swirling around his legs as he crossed the road toward the factory building where his car was parked. The garage was one level below ground. He took the elevator, the same one he had always used. The doors slid open with a metallic groan, revealing an empty cabin. He stepped inside, pressed the button for the car park, and leaned against the wall like he'd done 1,000 times before. The ride should have been over in seconds, but halfway down, the elevator suddenly started shaking violently and stopped dead. The display showed it was stuck between floors. Sunny jabbed the door open button a couple of times to see if that would get it working again. Nothing. He then pushed the emergency call button, and the speakers crackled to life. But there was no voice on the other side, just static. He pulled out his phone to see if he could call someone. No signal. And that's when he heard it. A woman's voice. It was faint, but clear, singing an old Cantonese song. One of those ballads from another era, a song Sunny hasn't heard in ages. The sound seemed to come from behind him, from the corner of the elevator. At the same time as he was hearing this, He felt a thin draft of icy air slide down the back of his neck. Sunny was terrified. He didn't dare turn around, too scared of who or what he might see in the elevator with him. He just stared straight ahead at the floor display and pretended like he didn't hear anything as he kept hitting random buttons on the panel in a panic, frantically wishing for the elevator to move again. After what felt like ages, it finally did move. The doors opened to a dim, echoing car park. Sunny stepped out fast and didn't look back as he power walked over to his car. The garage was a cavern of concrete and shadows, lit only by a handful of weak fluorescent tubes that gave off a yellowish-green glow. He spotted his car, rushed over, slid into the driver's seat, and locked all the doors. The engine roared to life. Then, out of nowhere, the radio turned on by itself. Static poured from the speakers, and beneath it, that same song started playing. But it wasn't the original artist singing it. The song on the radio was sang by the same voice he had heard on the elevator moments ago. He slammed the radio off and sped toward the exit. As he exited the garage and into the street, instinct made him glance in his rearview mirror. Standing by the exit gate was a figure. A woman, wearing a traditional Keipo outfit. She was standing there, pale, still, watching Sunny as he sped off. Whether it was a person, a shadow, or just a swirl of smoke from the burning of offerings on the street, Sunny couldn't tell. But one detail still unsettled him more than anything. The clock on his dashboard read 2 a.m. He left the office around 11 p.m. Even with a slow walk and the time stuck in the lift, he should have been on the road well before midnight. From the moment he shut the radio off to driving out had been maybe 5 minutes, not an hour. He was stuck in the elevator at most 2 minutes before it started working again. So where had all that time gone? To this day, Sunny still can't explain it. Since that night, Sunny never worked late again on Ghost Festival. Have any of you experienced anything similar to what Sunny experienced? Please tell us about your personal experience in the comments below. We would all love to hear about it. There's one concept that I want to touch on here that I think happened to Sunny regarding his time loss. This is referred to as 鬼打墙. This literally translates to ghost hitting the wall. This is when a spirit confuses or traps a person in a kind of time loop or altered space, so they lose track of reality. Many Hong Kong stories claim that when you snap out of it, you find much more time has passed than you remember. And with that, concludes our episode for this week. Thank you so much, Hong Kong horror fans, for joining us tonight and making it all the way to this point in the video. I really appreciate all of your support. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I look forward to speaking with you again next week. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. I'm your narrator, Simon. Many of you have reached out to me, expressing a ton of interest in hearing more about something we've covered in a previous episode. Hong Zaks in Cantonese, which translates to stigmatized properties. So tonight, I've got a pretty good story for you related to Hong Zaks that made its rounds in Taiwan. Alright, let's dive right into this one. The person who shared this story is a man who worked as a seasoned realtor. Let's call him Mr. Lau. He's been in the business for decades, handling properties in different cities in Taiwan over the years. After being in the industry for so long, he's pretty much seen everything, so nothing ever really surprised him anymore, or so he thought. It started with a single phone call. One morning, his phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Lau picked up. A male voice asked, "Hi, I saw your listing in the papers. Are you handling properties in such and such community?" "Yes," Mr. Lau said. "I know the area very well." The man explained, "I have a flat there, and I would like to rent it out or sell it. Either is fine, whatever is faster." It seemed that business was falling straight into his lap this morning, Mr. Lau thought. What a lucky day. He asked the usual questions. What's the layout of the unit? How many rooms there were? Whether anyone was currently living there. There was a pause. Then, the man replied, "It's on the 4th floor, 3 bedrooms, 1 living room. It's currently vacant. The 4th floor. In Cantonese, the number 4 is called Sei, and it sounds a lot like Sei, which is death. But some people do interpret this positively, like smoothness. CC Either way, the unit itself sounded fine, so they arranged to meet in person to discuss further. When Mr. Lau arrived at the address provided, the owner came down to the lobby to meet him and bring him upstairs to see the unit. He looked to be in his early 40s, in a polo t-shirt and khaki pants, but his face looked like he was exhausted, with heavy shadows under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. They shook hands and exchanged pleasantries before making their way upstairs. The man unlocked the door and gestured Mr. Lau to please come inside. Take a look. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Mr. Lau stepped in, and immediately, something felt off even before he started looking around. The air wasn't stale since the balcony door was open, so the ventilation was fine, but the atmosphere was super heavy, suffocating even, like an invisible weight pressing against his chest. He briefly walked through the rooms. The flat was spotless, the floors scrubbed, no mildew, no smell. Everything looked perfect, but yet, the strange, unexplainable weight lingered. Back in the living room, the owner handed Mr. Lau a glass of water, and with no change in expression, he said matter-of-factly, "My wife, she hanged herself here, right here," as he pointed to the ceiling. Mr. Lau nearly dropped his glass as he heard this. He forced a calm, polite smile and suggested they continue the conversation downstairs. In the lobby, the man told him everything. About 3 years ago, he discovered his wife had been cheating on him. What's worse was that the man who she'd been seeing had swindled her out of all her savings before he ran off. Furious upon finding out about this, he left her with their child and went to live with his parents and cut off all contact with her. Not long after this, his wife ended her own life in this very apartment by hanging from the chandelier in the living room. Neighbors only noticed when a foul smell seeped through the hallways. By the time the police arrived to check it out, about 2 weeks had passed already. After this incident, the flat sat empty for months. Eventually, he was able to rent it out, but that didn't last long. The first tenant was a young woman working in healthcare. She lived there for about 3 months before she also died there. Eerily, she hanged herself in the exact same spot beneath the chandelier. Her family brought in a Taoist priest to conduct rituals. During the ceremony, something went wrong. The candle flame split into two. The incense burned into 兩長一短, which translates to 2 long and 1 short, the dreaded 催命香, or death summoning incense. The priest said it foretold another death within the month and bloodshed within half a year. The owner dismissed it. He even removed the chandelier to avoid having something like this happen again. But then came the next tenant. It was another young woman. She also hung herself, but this time it was in the bathroom. Something was obviously very wrong with this unit. The owner gave up on renting it out and tried moving back in himself, but the nights were unbearable. He would often hear footsteps at night when there was no one else home. There would also be random laughter, crying sounds, and even whispers right next to his ear. He also started experiencing really dark thoughts after moving in. Thoughts of not wanting to be in this world anymore. One night, his parents came over to check on him after he didn't show up for a planned family dinner. They found him, collapsed in the living room, overdosed on sleeping pills. Luckily, they came when they did. He barely survived. He was not proud of it, but he admitted that he succumbed to his dark thoughts that night. Now, he looked at Mr. Lau and said, "If you want to take this property, I'll hand it over to you. Sell it, rent it, whatever you want to do, it's totally up to you. I just want it off my hands. If you don't want to do it, I understand, just leave the keys with management." Mr. Lau thought long and hard about it. The location was really good. He's also handled Hongzaks before. They weren't new to him, so he agreed. Once he had the keys, he returned the following day with his phone and tripod, and an amulet hanging from his neck for protection. Before entering, he knocked lightly and said out loud, "唔好意思，打攪晒." This means, "I'm so sorry, I don't mean to disturb." he turned on every light. First, he did a full walkthrough of the apartment with his phone. Then, he set up his tripod at the entrance and set the phone to record and began filming a video. Mr. Lau normally likes to take a video of himself introducing the unit, a walkthrough, along with still images to put on the website, as potential clients really appreciate the combination of the videos as well as images. As the phone was recording on the tripod, Mr. Lau walked to the living room, pulled open the curtains, letting the sunlight spill in. All of a sudden, the tripod collapsed. Mr. Lau's first thought was, great, that's my brand new phone. He rushed over to the entrance to check to make sure it wasn't broken. It was still recording. He exhaled a sigh of relief. Then he thought, that was strange. Tripods don't just fall like that for no reason. There was no wind or draft of any kind in here. Even if there was, the tripod is solid and built to remain standing even in heavy winds. What could have caused it to fall over so hard like that? But he brushed it off for the time being, finished filming, and left. Later, once he got back to the office, he reviewed the footage so that he could upload it. When the tripod fell, the phone remained recording the whole time, and as Mr. Lau was picking it back up, the angle of the camera caught only his legs. But as he was watching the playback, he could see that behind him was a pair of pale, white feet standing right behind him. He replayed it over and over again, heart pounding. He remembered the saying, "Don't keep such videos, they bring bad luck." So he only uploaded the still photos he took of the apartment along with the first walkthrough video, and uploaded them to the website with a vague caption, "Good ventilation, good lighting, suitable for quiet tenants." He deleted the strange video with the feet behind him, in fear of bringing something unwanted back home with him. Mr. Lau actually didn't really expect anyone to be interested. That night, he dreamt about the video he deleted, but the video in his dream was a bit different. Instead of just seeing a pair of pale feet, the camera panned upward, revealing the owner of the pale feet. It was a woman, wearing a set of brown pajamas. She looked at the camera in a very unnatural way, smiling. Behind Mr. Lau, that's when Mr. Lau jolted awake in a cold sweat. This was the first time in his life where he's had a nightmare so vivid that it actually jolted him awake. At 7 a.m., before Mr. Lau was even awake to go to work, his cell phone rang. Mr. Lau picked up, groggy, wondering who would be calling him so early. It was a man on the other end of the line, and he was interested in purchasing the unit that Mr. Lau had just listed last night and wanted to see it in person. By 9 o'clock, a young couple arrived in the lobby to meet up with Mr. Lau for a viewing of the apartment. They were in their early 30s and looked like a pair of young professionals. They were pleasant enough. After exchanging introductions in the lobby, Mr. Lau brought them upstairs for the showing. They seemed to really like the flat. They were talking about how great the layout was. Most importantly, the price was really low. The man smiled as they were walking through the bedrooms, saying that he liked what he saw so far. But when the woman reached the living room, her expression changed for some reason. She suddenly asked to leave the viewing abruptly. Once outside, she whispered to Mr. Lau, "Did someone die here?" Mr. Lau hesitated, but then admitted the truth, that indeed, there has been deaths here in the past. They told Mr. Lau that they would need to think on it and would reach out to him again once they made their decision. The next morning, the man texted Mr. Lau. "Good morning, Mr. Lau. My girlfriend had a strange dream last night after visiting the apartment. She dreamt of a woman in brown pajamas sitting in the living room. She told her, 'This place isn't right for you. Do not buy it.' So we've decided not to proceed with this. Thank you for your time." Later in the week, a single mother came for a viewing with her daughter, a second grader. The little girl ran around happily. When she stepped out onto the balcony, she giggled and said, "Mommy, the wind is so strong here." The strange thing was, the weather outside was calm and hot. There was not even a slight breeze. The mother liked the place. Mr. Lau warned her about the unit's past, but she waved it off, saying, "I pray often. I haven't done anything wrong, so I don't fear ghosts, if they even exist." She signed the lease on the spot. Within a week, she called him in a panic. My daughter says a Zizé visits her at night, climbing down from the ceiling with a very long tongue. Mr. Lau almost spat out his coffee. He asked if she wanted to terminate the lease. He won't be able to refund her deposit though. She agreed immediately and moved out the same day with her daughter. That night, Mr. Lau dreamed again. He was standing outside the apartment, holding the keys. The door opened on its own. The lights flickered on, one by one. A woman in a pair of brown pajamas walked slowly from the kitchen into the living room. She stood beneath the chandelier spot, her back to him, and whispered, "Do you want to stay?" Then her head started turning all the way around. It twisted 180 degrees as she looked at him with an unsettling smile spread across her face. Mr. Lau woke up again, drenched in sweat. The time on his phone read 4 a.m. Mr. Lau felt a chill run through him as he laid in bed trying to shake this nightmare from his memory. He decided to take the listing down, as it didn't feel safe to continue pushing it out. The day after, he returned with a colleague to hand the keys back to management. His colleague refused to step inside after Mr. Lau told him about it, so he went in alone to make sure all of the windows were shut properly before handing the key back to management. Mr. Lau bowed his head and said out loud, "唔好意思，呢幾日打攪晒，我唔會再返嚟㗎啦，請你原諒我." This means, sorry for disturbing you these past few days. I won't be coming back again, so please forgive me. Once he secured all the windows and closed the blinds, as he turned to leave, the bathroom door slammed shut with a deafening bang. There was no draft door or anything like that, since he made sure all of the windows were closed. It was impossible for that door just to slam shut like that out of nowhere. He froze, goosebumps crawling up his arm, before bolting back downstairs with his colleague. That night, Mr. Lau fell ill and ran a fever for 2 days. He also went straight to the temple to pray for safety, just in case anything decided to follow him home. Mr. Lau actually had one last dream about this woman in the brown pajamas after returning the key. The woman in the brown pajamas sat calmly on the sofa, staring at him. She spoke softly. "Please, tell my story, because the one who cheated wasn't me." The woman was calm in this dream, and she didn't have that unsettling smile he's always seen on her the past 2 times he's dreamt about her. She looked sad and alone. Mr. Lau almost felt sorry for her. As for whether that apartment ever sold, he doesn't know, and he doesn't want to know. So, what do you think happened here in Mr. Lau's story? If you remember from my other episode on Hong Zak's stigmatized properties, you'll know that when at least one death happens in a unit, the unit becomes classified as a Hong Zak. People usually tend to avoid these, not only because of superstition, but also because of cultural taboo. Even if you don't see anything being inside, it can still feel depressing or unsettling after you know about its past. This is why property prices drop sharply for such units, sometimes between 30 to 50%. The fact that there were multiple deaths in this particular unit, where the victims all passed in similar manners, suggests that there's a vengeful spirit maybe drawing others to repeat the act, like replaying its own trauma through new victims. Also, if you recall the Taoist priest warning the unit owner after seeing the death summoning incense, it's a classic omen. In Chinese folk religion, incense is a medium between worlds. If it burns unevenly or abnormally, it's believed to be a direct sign from the unseen. The priest's warning ties into long-standing beliefs that incense can reveal fates. This was the clearest red flag that the unit wasn't just unlucky, but actively dangerous for anyone who lives there. What about the mother and daughter who moved in shortly after? The girl, seeing the Zizé crawling from the ceiling with the long tongue, could really be what she saw, as children are considered more sensitive to spirits because they are closer to the inside of existence. The image of the long tongue is usually tied to victims of hangings. The tongue protrudes in strangulation deaths. I think this was the woman in the brown pajamas' true death form that the little girl was seeing. Also, who really was this woman in the brown pajamas? I'm pretty sure this was the wife of the unit owner. It seemed to me that at first, she tried to scare Mr. Lau away, but after he finally agreed to stop showing the apartment and to leave her alone, her final message to him was that her death wasn't just despair, but injustice. It's possible that the unit owner could have twisted the story around and made it out to be that his wife was the cheater, while in reality, it could have been him who was cheating the whole time. In Chinese belief, a spirit with grievance can't pass on peacefully. They linger, replaying their bitterness, sometimes dragging others into the same fate. Her repeated appearance, both in the tenant's streams as well as Mr. Lau's, suggests that she's the primary spirit of that flat. Thank you so much, Hong Kong horror fans, for making it all the way to this point of the video. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story, and if you have any similar experiences, please remember to share it with us in the comments below. I look forward to speaking with all of you again next week. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. Simon here. Today, due to popular requests, we have a story from the Philippines. The Philippines is humid, it's superstitious, and some of the communities there are very tight-knit. In some areas, everyone knows everyone. If you sneeze in your living room, your neighbor across the street will probably say bless you. This next story happened in a quiet subdivision in Cavite, just south of Manila. It's one of those places with wide streets, old trees, and big gates. The kind of place where you would not expect anything bad to happen. The story was shared by a man. Let's call him Mark. Mark was a young man when this horrific incident happened to him. At the time, he lived in a 2-story house with his parents and his 3 older sisters. And like many families in these subdivisions, his family was very close to their neighbors, especially the couple living directly across the street from them. Mark always called them Tito Hector and Tita Imelda. Tito Hector and Tita Imelda were the sweetest old couple you could ever meet. They were in their 70s, and they had no children of their own. They were long retired, and they treated the neighborhood kids like their own. Tita Imelda was famous for her kare-kare, peanut stew. Everyone in the neighborhood loved her stew. She would always send a Tupperware container over to Mark's house on Sundays. Tito Hector was the handyman. If a fuse blew or a pipe leaked, he was there with his toolbox before you could even call a plumber. They were great people, the perfect neighbors that everyone would love to have, or so everyone thought. The nightmare began one April. Now, if you've ever been to the Philippines in April, you know it's punishingly hot. It is the height of the dry season. The air is heavy, sticky, and still. Mark's family decided to escape the heat for a week. They packed up their van and drove north to Baguio, the summer capital, to cool off. Mark remembers that they were gone for about 7 days. They had family that lived there, so Mark remembers having a blast with all of his cousins that week. When they returned home, exhausted from the long drive, pulling into their driveway as the sun was setting, the first thing that Mark noticed was the house across the street. Usually, at 6 p.m., like clockwork, Tita Imelda would be watering her plants outside. The porch lights outside their home would always be on. Tito Hector? He would always be watching TV at this time. They would always hear his television, blaring the evening news. But that evening, nothing. It was just darkness. The house was pitch black. Curtains were drawn tight, which was odd because Imelda loved the evening breeze. The plants in the front yard looked thirsty, their leaves drooping in the heat. Maybe they went on vacation as well, Mark's mom said, unloading the bags. It made sense. Just because they don't have kids doesn't mean they don't have family in other parts of town. But later that evening, at around 11 p.m., when Mark was playing video games in his room, he heard it. Bang! It was a sharp, cracking sound. Not like a door slamming. It sounded like a firecracker had gone off outside. Mark nearly dropped his Game Boy from the shock he received. Once he recovered from the fright, He ran over to the window and looked outside. He expected to see some kids from the neighborhood setting off firecrackers, but the street, it was silent. No smoke, no sparks. There were no kids inside at all. The house across the street remained dark. He shrugged it off, thinking it had to just be a firecracker that went off somewhere in the area. Nothing out of the ordinary. 2 days passed. The heat was getting worse during the day, with temperatures hitting 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So Mark usually tried to stay indoors until the sun set, when it was cooler outside. On this particular evening, Mark was sitting on his front porch, playing his Game Boy, when he saw the front door across the street creak open. It didn't open fully, just a little crack. A figure slipped out. It was Tito Hector, but he looked different. Usually, Hector was a very neat man. Mark recalls only ever seeing him in a polo shirt tucked in, and hair combed neatly to the side. He was a man that cared about how he presented himself. Even when taking out the trash, he would always be in a polo shirt, looking well-groomed. But the man, standing in the shadows of the porch, looked disheveled. He was wearing a stained white undershirt and boxer shorts. His hair was standing up in wild tufts, as if he just rolled out of bed. "Tito Hector," Mark called out, waving excitedly. "We're back from our trip. We brought you some strawberry jam and random goodies." Hector froze. He slowly turned his head toward Mark, his movements stiff. He didn't smile like he normally does. He didn't wave back. He just stared at Mark for a long, uncomfortable moment, and then turned around and shuffled back inside his house, slamming the door behind him. What the? That was rude, Mark thought, but then he remembered the heat. Maybe the old man was just irritable. Maybe him and his wife had a fight. The next evening, things got even stranger. Mark's mom, Marie, was in the kitchen washing dishes when she heard a raspy voice calling from the front gate. "Marie, Marie." She turned off the water, wiped her hands, and went outside to see who kept calling her name. It was Tito Hector. He was standing outside their gate, gripping the metal bars so hard his knuckles were white. He was sweating profusely, like unnaturally so. Sweat was dripping off his nose, soaking his shirt. But despite the heat, he was shivering. "Hector, are you okay?" Mark's mom asked. "Where's Imelda? We haven't seen her in days." Hector didn't answer the question. He just stared at her with wide, bloodshot eyes. "My head," he whispered. "My head is splitting. It hurts so bad. Do you have ice? And maybe some Biogesic?" "Of course," she said. She ran inside, grabbed a bottle of the headache medication, and also filled a plastic bag with ice cubes. When she handed it to him over the front gate, their fingers brushed. She pulled her hand back instinctively. Later, she told Mark and his dad at dinner. Tito Hector, his hand, it wasn't just cold, it was freezing, like touching a piece of meat that just came out of the freezer, and he smelled sour. "He probably has a fever," Mark's dad said, dismissing it. "The flu is going around, you know." But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. That night, he couldn't sleep. He went to his window and looked across the street. The house was dark again, but there was a faint flickering light coming from the living room window, like a candle, or maybe it was the TV. Through the gap in the curtains, Mark saw a silhouette. It was Tito Hector. He was sitting in the middle of the living room, facing the wall, and he was moving. He was rocking back and forth. And every few seconds, he would raise his hand to his head and hit himself, rock back and forth a few more times, then hit himself again. Mark watched for about 10 minutes, his skin crawling. Why was he just sitting in the dark like that by himself? Where was his wife? Why wasn't she stopping him? By the 5th day, the neighborhood started to notice the smell. At first, they thought it was a dead rat. It's not uncommon for rats to get stuck in the drainage pipes or die under the roof. But soon, the smell went from bad to worse. It was a thick stench that coated the back of your throat. It smelled like garbage left out in the tropical sun for weeks, mixed with something metallic. The neighborhood started complaining. The neighborhood watch came by to check the drains, but found nothing. Mark's dad stood in the driveway, covering his nose with a handkerchief. "I think it's coming from there," he pointed. "From Hector's house." Mark looked at the house. The flies. That was new. There are hundreds of them. Big green blowflies, buzzing against the glass of the living room window, trying to get in or out. "I'm going over there," Mark's dad said. He walked across the street and rang the doorbell. No answer. He banged on the gate. "Hector! Hector, open up. We need to talk about the smell." Silence. Then, the curtain on the second floor twitched. Mark looked up. He saw Hector's face pressed against the glass, but his face was gray. Not just pale, it was gray, and his mouth was hanging open. He looked at Mark's dad, then slowly raised a finger and pointed downstairs. Then he disappeared from the window. Mark's dad ran back to his house. "Call the police. I think something's wrong. Something is very wrong." It took the police about an hour or so to arrive. But then, the smell was so bad that the neighbors were standing outside their houses with shirts pulled up over their nose. The sun was beating down, baking the subdivision, amplifying the stench. When the police arrived, they opened the front gate and approached the front door. It was locked, but the smell was a big giveaway that something wasn't right inside. They kicked it in. Whoosh! The smell that rushed out was physical. It hit them all like a freight truck. Two of the officers immediately turned around and threw up on the porch. Mark and his family, watching from across the street, could smell it even from there. It was the smell of advanced decomposition. The police entered with handkerchiefs tied around their faces. They found Tita Imelda in the kitchen. She was sitting in a dining chair. But she wasn't just sitting, she was tied to it. In the state of her body, she had been dead for quite some time now. In the tropical heat, without air conditioning, nature had taken its course. She was almost unrecognizable. But here's the thing that made the police stop in their tracks. On the table in front of her, there was a plate. On the plate was a scoop of rice and some rotten meat, and a glass of water. It seemed like someone had been trying to feed her. The police moved on to the living room. Mark and his dad expected them to find Hector hiding, or maybe crying in a corner somewhere in the house. He had to be somewhere inside. They had just seen him. Mark saw him rocking back and forth the night before. Mark's mom gave him medication not too long ago, and his dad saw him in the window just an hour ago. They eventually did find Hector in the master bedroom upstairs. He was lying on the bed. He was wearing the same stained white undershirt Mark had seen him wearing that first night when he came out of the house. But there was a problem. Hector had a hole in the side of his head. A gun laid on the floor beside his limp arm. Blood on the mattress was black and dry. The skin on his face was tight, leathery, and sunken. According to the coroner who arrived later, based on the stage of decomposition, Tito Hector had been dead for at least a week at this point. Mark's family were away for a week. They came back. They saw Hector. They spoke to him. Mark's mom touched his hand, but the coroner said he most likely died only a day or two after his wife. The theory was that his wife fell extremely ill extremely quickly, and he had a psychotic breakdown, and he killed her to end her pain. Then, overcome with his guilt, he sat with her body for a day, tried to feed her corpse, and then finally went upstairs and shot himself. When the police were bagging evidence, they found something on the bedside table right next to Hector's rotting corpse. There was a plastic bag of water, melted ice, and a bottle of Biogesic. So, Hong Kong Horror family, what do you think happened here? Please pause the video here and let us know what you think happened. Alright, so what do I think happened here from a Chinese cultural perspective? I think this is a classic case of Yamwan Meisan. The soul has not dispersed yet. When the person dies very quickly, violently, or with extreme emotional attachment, their one, conscious soul may fail to leave the human realm right away. Since Tito Hector falls into that category, his sudden death from ending his own life would create what's known as La Lunyan Gandik One, a soul lingering in the human world. You might now be wondering, so since Tito Hector ended himself, he was expecting death. Will this death still be considered sudden? Yes, it does. Sudden death, in this concept, is not about expectation, but it rather means when Loibakap Jinsun, the soul had no time to turn away. It's a matter of mental expectation and spiritual transition. You can expect death mentally and still have your soul violently torn from your body. In Chinese metaphysics, deaths are roughly grouped like this. Non-problematic deaths would be your deaths from old age, long illnesses, gradual weakening, and peaceful passing. This allows time for the soul to disengage from the body, acceptance to settle, and attachments to loosen. Then, there are the high-risk deaths for Yamwan Meisan. These would be your violent deaths, unnatural deaths, and deaths resulting from people ending their own lives. Even if planned, these are still considered spiritually abrupt because the body is destroyed faster than the soul can reorganize. The moment of death still involves shock and overwhelming emotional force. Think of it this way. You can choose to jump off a cliff, but that doesn't make the impact gentle. There most likely is a ton of regret on the way down. The soul isn't eased out by consent. The violence of the act still tears the soul apart like a blender. In Tito Hector's situation, it's extremely high risk, not only because he ended himself, but because he committed murder first. This resulted in compounding factors. The murder of his wife created massive Yiblik Zandong, karmic shock. Then, the extreme guilt he felt afterwards bound him to the human realm. After that, he tried to feed the corpse of his wife food, which signals to me that there was somewhat of an obsessive attachment here. Trying to feed a corpse is not random madness in Chinese spiritual logic. He could not accept that his wife was dead. His soul was emotionally overloaded even before death. After death, Hector seemed to be in a state of Bazi, unaware of one's own death. When someone dies in shock or emotional collapse, their soul can remain trapped in its last mental loop, which many of you have heard of, I'm sure. I want to dive deeper into this concept here, as I've never really went into what it really is. Bazi is often mistranslated as doesn't realize they're dead, but practitioners mean something deeper. Death never registered in consciousness. This isn't related to denial or confusion in the human sense as we know it. It's more about the fact that the moment of death shattered the narrative thread that allows awareness to move forward. So the soul keeps running the last intact mental program it's familiar with. It's not really a memory, but rather a habit consciousness. The soul isn't thinking, I'm alive, just like how we don't think, I'm alive, when we're doing something in our everyday life. The soul is just acting out of habit. It's believed that time doesn't exist inside this loop. The soul doesn't experience a before or after, only the now. But that now is frozen at the last coherent moment that they can remember. As for Hector's situation, I believe that he was trapped in a very specific mindset. A mindset of him realizing his wife is sick and that he was failing her. He was helpless to save her. After death, He didn't experience himself as a murderer or a ghost, only a husband trapped in an endless moment of failure where he's desperately still trying to save her. I don't think Tito Hector was haunting the neighborhood out of malice. He lingered because of love and guilt. Thank you, Hong Kong Horror family, for making it all the way to this point of the video. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story. Until we speak again next week, stay safe and good night, everyone. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. Simon here. Let me ask you something. Do you enjoy going to the cinema? It's something most of us do without thinking twice. For most of us, it's a mini escape from real life as we catch the latest movie release. Maybe relax for a few hours. But what if I told you that movie theaters are actually known to be among some of the more haunted places you can visit? Think about it. They're usually dark, enclosed, and sometimes built in places with heavy history. They're magnets for yin energy. Have you ever experienced anything strange while you were catching a new movie? Or have you just been lucky enough not to notice who was sitting with you in the dark? In Hong Kong, if you sit down with the older generation, you might hear them say something a little strange. If you go to the movies, don't sit in the front rows. Those seats aren't for you. They're for wandering spirits. Now, that might sound like superstition or just old wives' tales, but by the end of tonight's episode, you'll understand why people say that. This next story was shared by a woman from Hong Kong. Let's call her Sarah. Now, Sarah isn't like most people. She has Yum Yuan An, yin yang eyes, the third eye. In other words, ever since she was a child, she's been able to see things that most of us can't. Beings that don't quite belong in our world anymore. By now, she's used to it. It's just a part of her life. But this particular incident, this one, shook her enough for her to remember every single detail, even after all these years. It happened to her many years ago, during the peak of Hungry Ghost Festival, when, according to tradition, the gates of the underworld are wide open and wandering spirits are free to roam among the living. What happened that night involved Sarah and several of her friends. So go ahead, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive right into Sarah's story. And as always, once we're done, we'll break everything down from a Chinese cultural perspective to see if we can figure out exactly what happened here to Sarah. Also, I try my best to answer everyone's comments, but I apologize if I'm unable to get to all of them in time, as some of them do fall through the cracks, or they get buried in my notifications. So if you see any questions from fellow viewers that you know the answer to, definitely feel free to respond and help each other out. Alright, so on this particular night, Sarah and 5 of her friends decided to meet up after work. So including her, there were 6 of them in total. It had been one of those exhausting weeks of crazy deadlines, long commutes, and the usual BS office politics. By Friday night, all they wanted to do was to switch their brain off and do something fun. Now, it just so happened to be the peak of Hungry Ghost Festival, the 7th lunar month, the time when older generations in Hong Kong tend to head home early, avoid unnecessary night outings, and definitely don't go looking for trouble. But Sarah and her friends were younger. Most of her friends didn't really buy into the whole supernatural stuff. As far as they were concerned, ghosts belonged in movies, not real life. And Sarah? She never told them about her Yum Yuan An, her yin-yang eyes, about the things she's been seeing her whole life. It was just easier that way. So, they shrugged off the warnings. Screw it, someone said. It's been a rough week. We deserve this. They decided on a midnight screening of a brand new horror film playing in one of Hong Kong's older districts. When they arrived, there were people in the building, but not many. For a Friday night, it felt unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in during Ghost Month, when most people would rather stay home than wander the city after dark. Sarah's friends loved it. They practically had the whole theater to themselves. None of them had any idea that the real horror wouldn't be coming from the screen. Among Sarah's group of friends that night was Jerry. A few weeks earlier, he had fractured his ankle during a soccer match. Now he was stuck on crutches, moving slower than everyone else. The rest of the group naturally drifted toward the escalators that led up to the ticketing level. But Jerry couldn't take the escalator. He had to take the accessibility elevator tucked off to the side. Sarah glanced at him, then at the others. "I'll go with him," she said. The others waved, and they stepped onto the escalator, rising slowly upward. "Meet you slowpokes at the top," someone yelled out. Jerry grinned and adjusted his crutches. "Don't go sit down without us," he choked. The elevator doors stood closed in front of them. He pressed the button, and they waited. Ding! The metal doors slid open slowly. Jerry adjusted himself, getting ready to hop on with his crutches. Sarah stood behind him, but as he stepped into the lift, she glanced up, about to follow him, and immediately froze. The elevator wasn't empty. Standing inside were 3 men. They weren't staff, and they certainly weren't moviegoers. They were dressed in strange clothing, long, heavy robes, the kind you only see in Chinese history books or period dramas. The top of their heads were shaved clean, and from the back of their heads hung long, thick braids in the Qing Dynasty style. But it wasn't their hair that made Sarah freeze. It was their necks. Their heads didn't sit properly on their shoulders. Each one was tilted at a sickening, unnatural angle, twisted and hanging loosely, as if the bones inside had been completely shattered. The 3 men simply stood there, staring straight ahead, as if they didn't even notice Jerry standing right in front of them. They didn't move. They didn't step out of the lift. Jerry couldn't see them at all. He stood inside the elevator, directly in front of these men, and looked back at Sarah. "Yo, Sarah, you coming or what?" he said casually. Jerry, how about we watch the movie another night?" Sarah blurted out. "What? What are you talking about, Sarah? We're already here. Come on, let's go," Jerry replied. Not wanting to ruin the mood or draw more attention, Sarah forced herself to step into the elevator beside Jerry, pretending she couldn't see the entities standing just behind them. She stayed close to Jerry as the doors closed and the elevator began moving upward. The ride felt like it lasted forever. In the blurry reflection of the metal doors, Sarah could see that one of the figures was slowly getting closer to her. She didn't dare turn around. Instead, she shut her eyes tightly, trying not to look at it anymore. Finally, the elevator reached their floor. The doors opened, and Sarah stepped out quickly, almost before Jerry could react. She ran straight over to the rest of her friends, who were standing in a circle, laughing and joking as they waited for her and Jerry, completely unaware of what had just shared the elevator with them. "Hurry up, you two," her friends called out as they spotted them arriving. "The movie's starting. Let's just get inside." They were right. If they didn't move now, they'd miss the opening scenes. Sarah didn't have a chance to tell them what she had just seen in the elevator, and she wasn't exactly sure she wanted to tell them. They all rushed forward, handing their ticket to the ticket collector standing outside the theater. Sarah remembers it vividly. It was theater number 7. Honestly, all she wanted to do was go home at this point. Even though she sees ghosts throughout her life, these 3 in the elevator had been different. They weren't faint, transparent figures that blurred at the edges. They were extremely solid. But she didn't want to be a killjoy. She told herself everything would be fine now, and assumed that was the last she'd see if these 3 entities. The 6 of them sat together in a row near the back. There was an empty seat at the far end of the row, the aisle seat. For now, they decided to use it as a spot to pile their handbags and jackets, thinking that they could just remove their things if someone claimed it later. After all, the theater was mostly empty. There were a few scattered patrons here and there, but for the most part, it was quiet. Sarah took the seat closest to the aisle, right beside their stack of belongings. The lights dimmed, and the movie started. But the horror wasn't on the screen. As Sarah tried to settle in and get into the movie, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye to her right. She glanced at the aisle seat, the one they had been using for their bags. It wasn't empty anymore. Sitting there in the dark, on top of their jackets and handbags, was a person. In the flickering light of the movie screen, Sarah couldn't make out a face. It was just a blur of gray static. The features, impossible to distinguish clearly, but she saw the back of the head. The long, distinct black braid of the Qing dynasty rested against the back of the aisle seat. One of the men from the elevator. Sarah froze in terror. She tried to look forward, to pretend she hadn't seen him. Growing up in Hong Kong, everyone knew the rules. Her grandmother had drilled it into her head. If you ever see something you're not supposed to see, pretend you didn't. It was a rule Sarah had lived by her whole life, especially with her Yamyang-han. And so far, it's always worked out well for her. Suddenly, her friend to her left nudged her sharply. "Sarah, why are you laughing so hard?" The friend hissed, whispering aggressively. "Stop it. You're annoying everyone." Sarah turned slowly. "I'm not laughing," she whispered back, her voice trembling. They both looked toward the end of the row. The laughter was coming from the aisle seat. The chair was vibrating, rocking violently against the floorbolts, as if the thing sitting there was laughing. It wasn't just them. A girl and her boyfriend in the row directly in front of Sarah's group suddenly turned around. The girl didn't look at Sarah. Her wide, panicked eyes were fixed on the empty seat at the end of the row. Sarah felt a chill. It was clear this girl could see something too. Maybe she was like Sarah and had Yamyang on. She turned quickly and whispered in her boyfriend's ear. Within seconds, they left the theater. In that moment of sheer terror, Sarah made a fatal mistake. She looked directly at the figure. Eye contact. The instant she realized what she did, she looked away. But something strange happened. When she looked up again, the theater had changed. Even in the dim light, she could tell it wasn't the same. The room looked older, like a cinema from decades past, and it was full. Every single seat was occupied. Sarah hadn't seen anyone enter, yet somehow the theater was now packed. The people, they looked off. Their clothes didn't belong in this era. It was as if she had been transported to a Hong Kong cinema back from the 60s or 70s. She couldn't take it anymore. Heart pounding, she stood up and ran out into the lobby. The air felt instantly lighter. She bent over, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. The staff outside, the same one who had been collecting tickets, noticed her. "Are you alright?" he asked. "Yeah," Sarah said. "There's just too much people in there. I needed to get out." The staff frowned, confused. Ma'am? The showing's barely got anyone in it tonight." Sarah looked back into the theater. He was right. Aside from her friends and a few scattered strangers, the room was almost empty. All of the people that she saw in there just a few seconds ago were now nowhere to be found. She could see from outside that her friends were now gathering their things, looking concerned. She felt awful. She didn't want to ruin the night for everyone. "You see them too, huh?" the staff said, leaning casually against the wall. Sorry? Sarah asked, startled. The other guests. You can see them too. I thought I was the only one. Sometimes, they don't want to be seen. They're here a lot of the time. Just pretend you don't see them. And don't walk against the walls. They like to stick to the edges when they move around. Before Sarah could respond, her friends came out into the lobby, grabbing their jackets and bags. Sarah, are you okay? They asked. Jerry told us you weren't feeling well earlier and wanted to go home. You should have just told us. Come on, let's go. The movie sucked anyway. That night, Sarah burned a fever. She was sick for the next 3 days, barely able to get out of bed. But after it passed, everything returned back to normal. After this incident, Sarah never stayed out late again during Hungry Ghost Festival. So, Hong Kong Horror family, what exactly happened here on this night at the movies for Sarah? Please, pause the video here and let us know what you think in the comments below. Alright, so what do I think happened here in Sarah's experience? There's a lot to take away from this one. The first is the time period and when this happened. Sarah mentioned that this occurred during Hungry Ghost Month. During this time, there are usually spikes in reports of paranormal incidents, such as Sarah's, and for good reason. This holiday is a pretty big deal in our culture. During this month, it's traditionally believed that the gates of the underworld are open, allowing spirits of the deceased to leave the underworld and wander freely in the living world until the end of this holiday. This is a time when boundaries between Yin, the world of the dead, and Yang, the world of the living, are at their thinnest. Because of this, paranormal activity is said to spike, and locations that are usually mundane, like alleyways, old buildings, and yes, movie theaters, can become hotspots for supernatural encounters. This involves not just restless or wandering spirits, but also ancestral ghosts seeking offerings, vengeful ghosts, or those who died tragically. The older generation in Hong Kong treats this period with extreme caution. Many will avoid traveling at night, refrain from swimming, and even delay major life decisions. The reasoning is both practical and spiritual. Since wandering spirits are believed to be everywhere at this time, the risk of encountering something malevolent or being drawn by a spirit is higher. For Sarah and her friends, who were young and skeptical, their choice to go out during the peak of Ghost Month placed them directly in the path of active spiritual energy. Her Yum-Yum-An, yin-yang eyes, made her especially sensitive to this energy, allowing her to perceive things the others couldn't, like the 3 Qin Dynasty men in the elevator, the occupied aisle seat, and the temporary vision of the Full House theater. Next, I want to touch on why movie theaters are often considered hotspots for spirits in Asia. As I've mentioned earlier, theaters are usually very dark and enclosed. There's no windows, so to ghosts, this is like a 5-star hotel. It's the type of environment they prefer to gather to hide and rest. Also, you have to keep in mind, Chinese culture has a long history of entertaining the dead through ghost operas. During the Hungry Ghost Festival, we built massive bamboo theaters for Chinese opera, where the entire front row is left empty for the VIPs of the underworld. If a human sits there, they will be plagued with bad luck, because they're most likely sitting on a ghost's lap. This tradition has bled into modern cinema culture. Ghosts also retain the habits they had when they were alive. If they loved going to the movies, as humans, they still crave it as spirits. They are drawn to that strong emotion in the room. Your fear, your laughter, your sadness. They feed off that energy. In traditional Cantonese opera and older cinemas, front row seats or specific aisle seats were often left empty intentionally. These are pretty much reserved for the wandering spirits, so they could enjoy the show peacefully. By piling their jackets and bags onto that seat, Sarah's group essentially treated a spirit's reserved seat as a luggage rack. This is viewed as a direct sign of disrespect, inviting the spirit to make its presence known. So, what about the 3 men that Sarah saw in the elevator? Who were they? Were they just visiting from the underworld during Hungry Ghost Month? Or were they here this whole time? All great questions. It's hard to say, but based on the details, I would lean toward these spirits being bound here and not just visiting. I personally would classify them as day-boggling, earthbound spirits, for a few reasons. Sarah mentioned that this theater was located in an older district in Hong Kong. Many of these older districts, like Songwang or Sai Yingpun, were sites of early colonial settlements, or even execution grounds. If a modern cinema is built on top of an old execution ground or mass grave, the spirits don't just leave because the building changes. They're tethered to the earth. Elevators often act as conduits. They move vertically through the layers of the building, piercing the earth. I think that these three men most likely died on this patch of land in the past. The elevator shaft cuts through the land where they died, so it's passing through their space. Elevator shafts also act like deep wells. It pierces the earth and creates a direct tunnel upward and downward to the underworld. Sarah also mentioned that these men were dressed in very old-style clothing and had a classic Qing Dynasty-style braid. This meant that these ghosts were extremely old. Lo Guai. This isn't a recently deceased person who's confused. This is a spirit that's been dead for over 100 years. Their resentment, or yunhei, has had a century to marinate and solidify. They're often viewed as more powerful and harder to banish than modern spirits. I think they were most likely killed by hanging on this property in the past. Sarah noticed that all of their necks were bent and looked broken. Public executions, often by beheading or strangulation, were common in the Qin Dynasty legal system for serious crimes. And as many of you know by now, spirits who die violently often get trapped in the trauma of their final moments. The fact that they were all standing still, staring blankly with broken necks, suggests to me that they were trapped in a residual haunting, a recording of their pain playing on a loop. So what about the part when Sarah made eye contact with the ghost, and all of a sudden, she saw the theater change? Why did that happen? And why did she see all those people that seemed to appear out of nowhere? I think this was a result of a few different factors. Since it was peak ghost festival, the veil between the living and the dead were already extremely thin. That, combined with the yin-heavy movie theater, which amplifies the power of the spirits inside, and the fact that Sarah has Yumyang on, was the perfect recipe for disaster. This was a full temporal overlap between the two worlds. In the right conditions, ghosts can project environments or scenes familiar to them, creating a layered reality. This isn't hallucination. It's a cultural belief that spirits can temporarily alter the perception of space, especially for someone with Yamyang. I think the ghost was not necessarily malevolent, but just curious or bored, and he wanted to show Sarah things from his perspective, something that he's either experienced before in his own lifetime, or something that he wishes he could have experienced before he died. This type of vivid, immersive manifestation is usually only perceivable to those with spiritual sensitivity, like Sarah. For most people, like our friends, the world remained normal because their yang energy effectively shields them from yin projections. Sarah's eye contact acted like a trigger, allowing the spirit to fully project himself and manipulate the environment in her perception. This is consistent with Chinese belief that ghosts cannot impose themselves fully on the living unless the living acknowledge them in some way, often by direct attention or fear, which is one reason why elders will often tell you to never look at them if you can see them. And what about what the staff told Sarah? It seemed like this gentleman, like Sarah, has some type of sensitivity. He too is able to see them to some degree. He mentioned something very interesting. He told her not to walk close to the walls because the spirits prefer to move around close to the edge of the walls. This is actually true in Chinese metaphysics. A path where people walk is divided by energy flow. The center is yang. The middle of the corridor, hallway, or street is where human traffic is heaviest. It's where sunlight hits and where air moves fastest. This creates a strong current of yang-hei, yang energy. Spirits being made of yum-hei, yin energy, find this energy abrasive, hot, and overwhelming. The edges, on the other hand, the corners and the areas flush against the wall, are where the air is stagnant, shadows gather, and the temperature is cooler. This is the yin zone. This is why ghosts prefer to walk on the sides of a path, by the edges. Also, spirits are often described as having a magnetic or sticky quality to them, because they lack a physical body. They're being drawn to the structural stability of the walls and corners to anchor themselves, so they don't get blown away by the wind or strong yang energy. Elders will often scold children for walking against walls or alleyways in old buildings at night. They say, walk in the middle, you might bump into a spirit. If you walk against a wall where a spirit is resting, you're essentially pressing your body against theirs, which leads to a direct transfer of yin energy and potential spiritual attachment. In Chinese metaphysics, this physical overlap between the living and the dead results in a few very specific terrifying consequences, such as yin energy transfer, where your yang energy is sapped and their yin energy seeps directly into your bones. This is that deep chill that you hear people say they feel sometimes. By pressing or bumping into them, they may also get offended and cling to you. They can literally latch onto your back and ride you like a vehicle. So in short, try not to walk against the wall in yin-heavy places and stay in the center lane where most people walk. Thanks so much, Hong Kong Horror family, for making it all the way to this point of the video. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode, which ended up being a little bit longer than usual. Until we speak again next week, stay safe and good night. Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Hong Kong Horror. I'm your narrator, Simon. Tonight, we're taking a trip back to Japan together as we dive into an older local story from Saitama Prefecture that's pretty terrifying and heartbreaking at the same time. Let's dive right into it. In the late 1990s, there was a young architecture student. Let's call him Kenji. So, Kenji was working as an intern at a small design firm in Tokyo at the time. The firm was not a large international firm. It only employed 5 people, including himself. It was led by a middle-aged architect named Mr. Ishida. Most days, Kenji's duties were pretty simple: filing paperwork in the office, getting coffee, and occasionally surveying old properties, taking measurements, photographing interiors and exteriors, then redrawing the structures into CAD files. It wasn't glamorous work, but for an intern, it was valuable experience. One morning, Mr. Ishida placed a thick file on Kenji's desk. Inside was a commission for an old house in Saitama Prefecture. The property had been left behind by the owner's grandmother, and now the family was considering renovating it into a guest house. Ishida gave Kenji the key. Go there tomorrow morning, he instructed. Take some photos, measure everything. Be careful though. The place has been empty for years. Old houses can't have termites or rotting beams, so just watch where you're stepping. We don't want you getting injured. Kenji agreed, quietly thrilled. This would be his first time handling a survey alone. The next morning, after a few train transfers and a long bus ride, Kenji finally arrived at a tiny rural town. It was nearly 12 in the afternoon by the time he reached the house, which was surrounded by rice fields and trees. The house looked abandoned and faded, but the frame looked solid. Kenji took the key out and unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The stale air hit him immediately. It smelled of dust and mildew. He set down his bag, took out his flashlight, and began his work. The entryway was blanketed in dust, the kind that clung thick to every surface and rose in little clouds with each step. On the wall, a small wooden rack leaned slightly, burdened by a single forgotten item, a child's raincoat. Once bright yellow, it now hung limp and colorless. Kenji worked methodically, measuring the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. Out of curiosity, he tested the faucet. Nothing. The water had long since been cut off, as expected. In the master bedroom, as he was doing his measurements, He accidentally bumped into the wardrobe, knocking a binder off of it. It fell to the floor with a loud thud, scattering a bunch of papers across the floor. It seemed like hospital records. As Kenji went to pick them back up, he noticed that the name of the patient was someone named Hiroshi. The diagnosis listed a rare condition: congenital porphyria and photosensitivity. The records explained that sunlight exposure can cause blistering, necrosis, and even death. Kenji carefully put the papers back and continued his work. At the end of the hallway, one room was marked by a sticker: Hiroshi's room. Inside, the space was different from the rest of the house. It was carpeted, with a small bed and a towering bookshelf stacked with manga and toys. In the corner, a CRT television sat behind an old Super Nintendo gaming console. But the windows were boarded shut from the inside, thick planks nailed tight. The nails were rusted with age. On the walls hung childish crayon drawings. One depicted a boy playing with another boy around the same age. At the bottom, in crooked handwriting, was the name Hiroshi. On the desk lay the sketchbook. Kenji flipped it open out of curiosity. The first page was scribbled black. "Today, I can't go outside again. Mommy says the sun will make me sick." The second page showed a boarded up window. "I want to play outside, but Mommy says no." The third page showed the boy with another boy. "Kaito plays with me. He's not afraid of the dark." The final page was nothing but a dense patch of black. As Kenji was looking at these drawings, that's when he heard it. A soft tapping sound. He froze, listening. Again, more knocks. He checked the hallway. Empty. Back inside the room, the sound returned. He searched under the bed, behind the shelves. Nothing. Then, he tapped the floor. The sound answered back. Pulling aside the carpet, Kenji found a hidden hatch. A crude ladder descended into darkness. He hesitated, then climbed down. The cellar was damp. Its walls were rough stone. In one corner lay a pile of blankets. As his flashlight beam swept across them, the blankets bulged. A frail voice whispered, "Mommy?" A small hand emerged, pulling back the covers. A pale little boy's face stared back at him. The boy asked, "Who are you? Have you seen my friend Kaito? Mommy introduced me to Kaito. He plays with me." Kenji could barely breathe. Finally, he stammered, "Why are you here?" The child answered softly, "I live here. This is where I play with Kaito." Kenji's chest tightened. Was this an abandoned child? This can't be the child from the drawings, right? That child should be grown up by now. Who was this? He promised the boy he would call for help, and hurried out. A few minutes later, police arrived. Kenji led them to the cellar. They went down, then came rushing back out, faces pale. More officers arrived. Then, more. Finally, an officer told Kenji what was going on. Inside, they couldn't find any living child, but they found two corpses. One of a little boy, and one of a woman. They've been dead for years. The boy, Hiroshi, had died from complications from his illness. The woman, his mother, overdosed on sleeping pills next to her son. The boarded window, the sealed room, all of it, had been the mother's way of protecting him from the sunlight. But there was more. Behind the boy's body, police found a note. In it, the mother confessed a terrible secret. Children in nearby prefectures had gone missing. 7 to 9-year-old boys. They had all been found alive, but all of their testimony were strange. Each said they had been cared for by a kind auntie in a windowless room. She fed them, played with them, read them stories, but always insisted on calling them Hiroshi. In her letter, the mother wrote, "I'm writing this letter to confess. Hiroshi has left me for weeks now, but I can't let go of him. I'm keeping him in the cellar. I've been abducting some of the local children occasionally. I know that they are not my Hiroshi, but when I see their smiles, I could imagine my son, if only he had been healthy. Each time I returned them, because they had families of their own waiting for them. And as much as I wanted them to stay with us forever, I know that their parents would be heartbroken. I cannot go on anymore. I can't live with this pain anymore. I must be with him. I must be with my son now. Kenji couldn't shake the image of the pale boy in the cellar, whispering, "Kaito, is that you?" Even in death, Hiroshi was still waiting for his friend. Later, the property owner called to apologize. The woman in the house was his aunt. She disappeared years ago, and no one could figure out where she went. He told Kenji that he would demolish the whole house and rebuild it from scratch. But weeks afterward, Kenji received another email forwarded by the owner. It was from a woman named Miss Asano, whose son was one of the children that was briefly abducted before being returned. Her message read, "My son is grown up now, but for years he was haunted by confusion. After learning the truth, we can finally understand. Though her actions were wrong, I know she only wanted to care for the child she lost. My son said she was kind, but every time he went into that cellar, he only remembers there being a kind boy that lived down there, and they played together." So, what do you think happened here in Kenji's story? Did he see the spirit of Hiroshi in the cellar that day? I personally think that the story isn't just about a haunted house, but about maternal love twisted by illness and the weight of grief. From a Chinese cultural perspective, the real terror here isn't only the ghost in the cellar, but the mother's refusal to accept Tianguo, cause and effect. She couldn't accept her son's fate, so she tried to fight against destiny. In doing so, she created more suffering for herself and for her child, and even for strangers' children. I want to break down what I think happened in this incident from a Chinese cultural point of view. Losing a sick child is devastating in any culture, and I would never wish this upon anyone. But in Chinese belief, refusing to let go of the dead creates a heavy imbalance. Spirits must be allowed to cross the Wangjunlo, the Yellow Springs Road, the path to the afterlife. By clinging on with a tight grip, she blocked Hiroshi's soul from moving on. That's why his ghost still lingered in the house. The mother abducting children, even though she returned them, would be seen as crossing a moral and spiritual line. It's not just a crime in the human sense, but a violation of Yunyip, cause and effect. She tried to fill her void by stealing from others. In Chinese folklore, this kind of act stains both souls, hers and her son's. The boy, who should have been reincarnated, instead became a Guan Yeguai, a lonely wandering spirit, all because his mother's obsession bound him to the mortal world. Also, by ending her own life in the house next to her son, she sealed the house with yin energy. In Chinese belief, ending one's own life anchors the spirit to the spot, trapping it. Her karmic debt, combined with her refusal to release her son, means neither of them could reincarnate. Both became restless spirits tied to the cellar of the house. Even though the mother spirit didn't appear for Kenji, I would be more surprised if her spirit wasn't in that house. Just based on her actions in life and how she clung to her son, it would make more sense to me that she continued to linger there after death as well, just to be with her son. To a Chinese audience, this isn't just a tragic story, it's a warning. 玩唔起嘅嘢唔好玩. Don't mess with things you can't control. Obsession leads to imbalance. Imbalance leads to karmic debt. And karmic debt manifests as hauntings. A Taoist priest or Buddhist monk would likely have to be called to perform a ritual. The mother and son are most likely trapped, forever reliving their pain. Though as tragic as the whole situation was, I think the mother's actions after her son's death were out of desperation and extreme grief. She couldn't accept fate, and in doing so, dragged her child's spirit down with her, unknowingly. The lesson here is, 有生有死,有聚有散. There's birth and there's death. There are gatherings and there are partings. That is the natural cycle. When we cling too tightly to what's gone, we don't just trap ourselves, we may also trap the spirits of those we love. In Cantonese belief, the kindest act you can do for the dead is to let go. perform proper rituals, and allow them to reincarnate. Otherwise, love can twist into bondage, and both the living and the dead remain trapped in a cycle of pain. Alright, let's move on to our second story for tonight. Now, we're traveling to Thailand for a pretty terrifying incident shared by a man. Let's call him Anucha. About 10 years ago, Anucha was in his 40s, and he was struggling to get by financially. He had just been laid off from a small factory in Bangbo when it shut down. He didn't make much at this factory anyways, but with all his living expenses, he wasn't really able to save much of his salary. He only had a modest amount of schooling, so job opportunities for him were pretty scarce. He thought about driving a taxi in Bangkok, but he barely knew the streets there. Also, he would have no way to gather the initial funds needed to even rent the taxi, as well as the operating license fee, along with other expenses that would be required to do this. Anucha was in a pretty tough spot and didn't really know what to do. Soon he would become homeless if he didn't find another job soon, as rent was coming due soon. One day, his friend Wasan called him. They used to work together at the factory. Since being laid off, Wasan had found work as a caretaker for a wealthy family, looking after a house and garden while the family was away. Coincidentally, Wasan's employer's neighbor was also looking for a live-in caretaker. Knowing Anucha was an honest man and desperate for work, Wasan said that he could recommend him. It sounded like the dream job. There wasn't too much that needed to be done on a daily basis, just some light duties. Meals were provided, and best of all, a room of his own would also be assigned to him, so he would be saving so much money on rent alone. Anucha was eager and really wanted this job. Through Wasan's referral, the owner agreed to meet with Anucha the next morning. Anucha woke up extra early to get ready. He didn't have much fancy clothes, but he put on his best polo shirt, and then hurried over to the address by bus. The house was enormous, with a sprawling garden. Anucha's never set foot in such a beautiful piece of property before. He's only seen houses like this in movies, as he's never usually in areas where houses like this even exist. A maid opened the gate for him when he arrived. Soon, he was sitting across from the owner of the property. He was a polite man, around the same age as Anucha. He was some sort of businessman, and by the looks of it, he was really successful at it. Anucha looked at the man in awe, comparing himself to him. They were both around the same age. This man was already so successful, while Anucha, who grew up poor his whole life, was struggling to figure out what his next meal would be. It made him slightly depressed to think about the stark difference between their lives, but he tried to shake these negative thoughts out of his head. He put on his most polite smile, eager to put his best foot forward and land this job. The man explained that he had recently bought a second home outside of the city, where he now spends most of his time. So this house now sat mostly empty, as he only uses it occasionally when he's in town. He needed somebody to help maintain the garden, take in the mail, and pretty much just occupy the property while he was away, to make sure nobody breaks in or anything like that. Cleaning wasn't part of the job, since there was already a maid who came by once a week to do that. Anucha was brought on a quick tour of the property. It was the most beautiful house he's ever seen. The garage alone was bigger than most houses he's seen. Inside sat two gorgeous sports cars that Anucha was even afraid to look at because of how expensive they must be. He could work his entire life and probably never even be able to afford the tire on one of these things. Finally, Anucha was shown to the small room at the back of the property that would be his. It was a separate structure from the main house. It was nothing fancy, a simple decent-sized room with a twin-sized bed, a wardrobe, a dressing table, and a small bathroom to the side. It even had an air conditioner. It wasn't much to most people, but to Anucha, it was everything he's ever wanted. It was 10 times nicer than his current apartment now. His eyes were wide with awe as he saw this room. He told the owner that he would work very hard if given the opportunity. The owner seemed to really like Anucha and asked if he could start immediately. Anucha, shocked at how quickly the owner made his decision, accepted without hesitation. He said he could begin tomorrow. The deal was sealed. That very evening, he packed his belongings from his apartment and officially moved in. The owner explained the duties once more, left him an emergency contact number just in case anything came up, and a small allowance for meals. Then, the owner departed for the countryside to his new mansion, leaving Anucha alone in this massive house. It felt like a dream come true. Anucha has never even dared to dream of himself ever being able to enter a house like this, let alone being able to live in one, all while being paid to do so. The first night, the neighborhood was eerily quiet. The houses here were all large and spaced far apart, and once darkness fell, silence pressed in. Anucha inspected the property carefully. He wanted to take his duties seriously and do everything correctly, realizing how lucky he was to land this job. This job was the only thing keeping him away from being homeless, so he wanted to do it right. He made his rounds around the property, making sure everything was in order and that there was nobody sneaking around. Once he made sure that all the windows and doors were securely locked, he made his way to his room, took a nice shower, and then crawled into bed to browse his phone for a bit before trying to sleep. In this strange new room, he drifted in and out of an easy rest. The next morning, he woke up early so he could begin his daily duties. He began watering the plants. As he worked, a man suddenly appeared at the fence at the front of the property. He introduced himself as Prasert. He said that he too was a caretaker, responsible for the house next door. Smiling, he welcomed Anucha, asking if he had just moved in. Anucha politely nodded. Prasert gave a friendly nod and added, "If you have any questions, you can just ask me. I've been here a long time." It was nice. At least, he knew that if he needed anything, that there could be somebody he could call a friend nearby. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. Anucha worked diligently every day, watering the plants, tidying the house, and keeping watch of the property. But on the third night, something changed. The air was heavy and unnaturally still. On this night, not even the crickets sang. A suffocating silence blanketed the property. Anucha tried to ignore the unease and forced himself to go to sleep. Deep into the night, he was jolted awake by a harsh, grating sound. It sounded like rope against wood. Heart pounding, he peered through the slatted window, half expecting to see a thief trying to break in. But there was nothing. The sound faded, replaced by oppressive silence again. He turned back toward his bed and froze. Suspended at eye level in front of him were a pair of feet, bare, dangling and swaying gently. His gaze rose slowly. Above him hung a body of a man. The face was swollen, eyes bulging, tongue protruding grotesquely from his mouth. The figure was hanging from a water pipe above the ceiling. Something about this man looked familiar. Despite the grotesque face, Anucha had seen this man somewhere before. That's when he realized this was the same man that he saw at the gate, who introduced himself as Prasert. Anucha's body froze. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. And then the corpse began to sway, slowly rocking back and forth as if he was on a swing in the playground. Just as his terror peaked, a voice whispered directly into his ear. "Do you want to try it yourself? You'll enjoy it." Followed by a demonic laugh. Terrified by the sight, Anucha screamed before blacking out from fear. He woke up at dawn, lying on the cold floor. His clothes were soaked in urine. For a long time he just sat there on the ground, frozen, staring at the ceiling where the man had it hung the night before. There was nothing there now. Shaken, but determined not to let this scare him out of his dream job, he got up, changed his clothes, and went about his daily chores, trying his best not to think about what he saw last night. As Anucha was watering the plants, he was in a daze, still trying to forget about last night, when all of a sudden, someone started calling out to him. "Anucha! Hey Anucha!" Anucha snapped out of his daze and looked up to see who was calling him. At the front gate was a familiar face. No, not Prasert. It was his friend, Hosan, the one that worked at the factory with him before. The one that introduced him to this job. Anucha almost jumped with joy to see Hosan. He almost forgot. Hosan did mention that his employer was the neighbor. He put down the hose and ran over to the front gate. They caught up for a few minutes before Anucha asked, "Hosan, does this house have something in it?" Hosan stayed quiet for a few seconds, then sighed. "I didn't want to tell you before because I didn't want to scare you. I knew you were desperate for a job, so you would have taken the job anyway. But you're not the first caretaker for this house. There have been several before you. Most don't last a week. I've heard that he doesn't appear every night, just once in a while. He explained. The figure that Anucha had seen was the ghost of a previous caretaker from a few years ago. His name was Prasert, and he had once worked here for a few years, doing the exact same role as Anucha. Prasert had a girlfriend, Mary, who was the maid for this house at the time. She broke up with him after finding someone new. Despair consumed him. One morning, when the owner didn't see him report for work, they checked his room and found him hanging there, in the same room where Anucha now slept. Since then, every caretaker who stayed overnight claimed to witness his apparition dangling above the bed. Not every single night, but every so often. Anucha was horrified. He called the owner on the contact card that was given to him before. The owner picked up and apologized quietly after hearing what Anucha experienced. Yes, the owner admitted. He had invited monks to bless the property, but nothing worked. The spirit would actually used to terrorize the whole property, but after the blessing, he was now contained to the room, and he doesn't always appear. Still, Anucha could not afford to quit. He agreed to remain, but with one condition. He would sleep elsewhere. The owner agreed and told him that he could sleep in the living room inside the main house if he wanted to. And so, for nearly 2 years, Anucha lived and worked there. He never stayed overnight in that room again, but he did still go in there to shower and to change. He's never seen the spirit of Prasert again since he no longer slept there. But the memory of that first encounter, those feet dangling at eye level, the whisper by his ear, it's something he will never forget. So, what do you think happened here to Anucha? I personally think the room where he was assigned to stay can be considered a stigmatized property, a hongzak, since someone ended their own life inside. There are some overlapping concepts between Thai and Chinese beliefs that sudden deaths can result in restless ghosts. It seems that Prasert, the man who hanged himself, was repeating the last few moments of his life on loop. The place of death is the strongest anchor. By moving into the main house, Anucha effectively stepped outside of the spirit's domain, which seemed to work, and he didn't get harassed again, even though he still worked and lived on the property. This haunting that Anucha experienced wasn't some random spirit encounter. It was directly tied to that event that happened in that room, where Prasert took his own life. He remained there, angry, restless, and bound to the site of his death, which also explains why the monk's blessings failed. These types of spirits are notoriously hard to release. Thank you, Hong Kong horror fans, for making it all the way to this point of the video. I hope you enjoyed this one. I look forward to speaking with all of you again next week.